Oh, that was loud. All right, welcome to the San Ramon Valley Unified School District's Board of Education meeting. We want to let the public know that we are video recording this meeting, and you can find it live streamed on our district's YouTube channel. So we'll start with attendance. Travis?
Travis Hodges, everyone. Great to meet you. I'm the student board member on the SRVUSD Board of Education, and thank you for joining us here tonight.
Sorry about that. I caught you off guard.
Good evening. I'm Rachel Hurd. I am the trustee representing Area 5.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Jesse Van Zee, and I'm the trustee representing Area 1.
Good evening, everyone. Thanks for coming out to join us tonight. I'm Susanna Ordway, and I represent Area 4.
Hi, everyone. I'm Shelley Clark. I represent Area 2.
And I'm Laura Brett, and I represent Area 3. All right, so next we'll do the Pledge of Allegiance, and I'll invite Travis to lead us. All right, so we usually start off our meetings with some student and staff recognition. And tonight for our student recognition, it is our pleasure to acknowledge 3 exceptional students. 2 are talented dancers, and the 3rd an exceptional humanitarian. First, let me introduce you to Braylon Schaefer from Monte Vista and Presley Nava from San Ramon Valley High School. If you girls could come to the front with your medals and your really cool jackets. These 2 extraordinary students not only represent our district with excellence, but have also brought immense pride to our country. Braylon and Presley recently returned from the World Tap Dance Championships in the Czech Republic, where they won gold medals for Team USA. The World Tap Championships are often referred to as the Olympics of Tap, bringing together 1,700 dancers from over 40 countries in an intensely competitive selection process. As members of a team of 6, Presley and Braylon competed in the Junior 1 small group division for dancers ages 13 to 14. Their routine performed to Ratata by Missy Elliott was an unconventional choice for tap dance, blending the energy of hip hop with the artistry of tap. The dynamic choreography included complex turns and acrobatic moves that are highly difficult to execute in tap shoes. Being on the podium, representing the United States as the national anthem played was an immense moment of pride for them, especially since they first danced together when they were just 6 years old. Presley and Braylon, your remarkable achievement exemplifies competencies from our learner profiles such as creativity and teamwork. And on behalf of the Board of Education and the community, we would like to congratulate you on this remarkable accomplishment. We are so proud of you both and can't wait to see where your talent takes you next. All right, so board, if we could come up and take a picture. So next, let me bring up Kenneth Sarup, a senior at Doherty Valley High School. Kenneth is, oh, there you are. Come on up. Kenneth is an exceptional student whose dedication to serving others earned him the San Ramon Chamber of Commerce WOW Award for Outstanding Teen Citizenship. Kenneth received this well-deserved honor at last Wednesday's award ceremony. Kenneth is a highly motivated student with a passion for neuroscience and technology. He is the co-founder and president of the NVHS Neurotech X Club, the first high school branch of this international organization. He excels at the most rigorous academic courses and has taught himself several computer programming languages. Oh, hold on, I gotta move the sheet. Committed to community service, Kenneth's involvement with a nonprofit organization, Book for Barrios, has made an impact both locally and globally. Here in our community, he cleared out shelves at local libraries and coordinated book collections with schools across the Tri-Valley, ensuring the unused books find new homes where they are most needed. His volunteer efforts resulted in the donation of over 15,000 books to underprivileged schools in the Philippines. By giving the gift of books and learning, he not only provided resources, but inspired hope, opportunity, and a brighter future for children across the globe. Kenneth, your dedication and service exemplifies the power of youth leadership and so many of the elements of our learner profile. On behalf of the board and community, we are proud of you and your passion for making a difference. Congratulations on receiving the Outstanding Teen Citizenship Award. All right, so tonight we also have the privilege of recognizing a very special member of our staff. John Campapiano, our Executive Director of Secondary Education, is a truly exemplary leader and was acknowledged as such by the San Ramon Chamber of Commerce at this year's Educator of the Year WOW Award. Those of us who know John can confidently say there is no one more deserving of this honor. While we know he is not someone who likes to be in the spotlight, we want to highlight him and say a few words about why John is so deserving of this honor. As a district leader in Ed Services, John plays an integral role in establishing high academic and personal standards among students and always encourages them to strive for excellence both inside and outside the classroom. He prioritizes the well-being of every person, ensuring that their needs guide his decision-making. John believes deeply in student agency and voice. He led the launch of our Student Senate several years ago and helped bring to fruition the first student board member, creating avenues for meaningful student leadership. He also prioritizes the importance of parents as partners in creating successful learning experiences for their children. And I can say, as someone that has witnessed him work with students, staff, and parents, he has a compassion and a sense of empathy, as well as the expertise to really make a huge difference in the kids that he works with. I will close by sharing what his colleague, Chris George, said about John when giving him the award at the actual ceremony. John cares deeply about students, about staff, about parents, about people. He just cares about people. He knows every person he comes in contact with almost immediately and deeply. He knows what motivates them, what inspires them, what moves them, and what they need to make them feel safe, valued, and heard. For all the people he mentors, he takes that knowledge and uses it to bring out the absolute best in whoever he is working with, whether that be students, principals, or teachers. It's an amazing trait, and he does it every time. One of the best compliments I ever heard somebody give is when they turned to a friend and said, "You're a good man. John is a good man, inside and out, and we are lucky to have you." So congratulations, John Campapiano. This is so well deserved, and we are so appreciative of you being a part of our district. Thank you. All right, so next we report out actions taken in closed session, and we did not take any actions from closed session. Can I have a motion to accept the minutes from the November 19th, 2024 board meeting?
I'll make a motion to accept the minutes from the November meeting.
I'll second that.
The motion was made by Board Member Clark and seconded by Board Member Van Zee. Roll call vote, Student Board Member Hodges.
Aye.
Board Member Hurd.
Aye.
Board Member Van Zee.
Aye.
Board Member Ordway.
Aye.
Board Member Clark.
Aye.
Board Member Bratt.
Aye.
Motion passes 5-0.
Right, great. And now we'll move on to agenda approval. Can I get a motion to accept the agenda?
I'll move to accept the agenda.
Second that.
The motion was made by Board Member Ordway and seconded by Board Member Van Zee. Roll call vote, Student Board Member Hodges.
Aye.
Board Member Hurd.
Aye.
Board Member Van Zee.
Aye.
Board Member Ordway.
Aye.
Board Member Clark.
Aye.
Board Member Bratt.
Aye.
Motion passes 5-0.
All right, and then we'll move on to consent agenda approval. Consent items are considered routine in nature and are approved by combining them into a single vote. Only a member of the board may request that a consent item be removed from the consent agenda to be considered and voted on separately. The public may comment on a consent item before the board approves the consent agenda, and I do not believe we have any public comment for consent items. I would like to pull consent agenda item 13.8, which is consideration of approval of resolution number 56/2425, authorizing the participation in the zero emission school bus and infrastructure ZESB incentive project. So that will move to agenda item 11.6. All right, so besides that, can I get a motion to accept the consent agenda?
I move
items?
approval of consent as amended.
I second that.
The motion was made by Board Member Hurd and seconded by Board Member Van Zee. Roll call vote, Student Board Member Hodges.
Aye.
Board Member Hurd.
Aye.
Board Member Van Zee.
Aye.
Board Member Ordway.
Aye.
Board Member Clark.
Aye.
Board Member Bratt.
Aye.
Motion passes 5-0.
Great, thank you. So now just some information just about our public comment. So if you'd like to make a public comment during the meeting, you can find yellow cards. They look like this, speaker cards. They're at the table by the door. You can speak to one of our staff members if you have any questions about that. You will have an opportunity to make a comment on agendized items when we come to that item. For comments on items not on the agenda, please submit your card for public comment for non-agendized items on tonight's agenda. Each speaker has a time limit of 3 minutes with a timer shown on the screen while you are speaking. This time limit will be enforced to ensure fairness. Please be aware that we may interrupt you and redirect you to the correct time to speak if your comment relates to a different agendized item or if it is not within our jurisdiction. As president, I reserve the right to announce a last call for speaker card submissions. Please have your speaker card submitted after we've had the report, but before we start public comment. And I'll make an announcement that I need all speaker cards brought up. The views expressed during public comment are those of the individual speaker. The absence of a response from the board or district staff does not imply agreement, and the district believes in an inclusive, welcoming, and safe environment during its meetings for all of our community. Please be mindful that students are in the room and watching virtually. We are all here to support them and to support their educational experience. And I also want to say thank you for joining us tonight. We really appreciate your engagement and your willingness to be a part of our meeting. All right, so next we will move to reports to the board, and we have 10.1 school highlight, which is California High School. Go Grizzlies. And we have Principal Demetris Ball.
Right. Good evening, board, Mr. Kamick, staff, and community. Thank you so much for the opportunity to share a little glimpse of the amazing experiences that we're helping create for our student, staff, and parent community at California High School. I want to first start off by providing a shout out to all my predecessors, the 10 principals that started California High School before me, including most recently Ms. Megan Kiefer, because we are building upon the community that they've established, and I take my responsibility extremely seriously. And so I just want to honor their legacy. Over my first 2 years as principal of California High School, I've gone through an extremely intentional process of learning who we are as a school community. the things that we needed, and how I could do my best to attend to those needs. Now, I had a little bit of an advantage after 3 years as principal at Iron Horse Middle School. I knew a lot of the students and families at Cal High. Early on, I identified the need for establishing trust from the inside out. We've had a lot of turnover in the admin over a short amount of time, and staff, students, community members didn't necessarily know who to trust. So, I realized that right from the beginning, from day one, that I needed to consistently show up with an open mind, an open heart, and being receptive to feedback, and with making changes, all with our students and families in mind. There have been some hard decisions over this short amount of time, but no matter what, I show up with a smile, committed to do the work, and communicating is one of the things that I really take seriously as well. So I'm consistent with my communication with my students, with my staff on a weekly basis. Part of that work has shown that developing a strong vision, mission, and set of non-negotiables to guide every decision that we make has been extremely important. And you can see that up on the screen, that we want to see 100% of our students displaying the learner profile skills on a daily basis because we empower and inspire personal and academic growth. Therefore, we collaborate intentionally, lead with empathy, and uphold accountability for our collective success. If all our students are living and displaying the learner profile skills, we're setting our students up for success. The image on the right is one of our students. That's Adam. This was taken 2 years ago, my first year at Cal, when he was a sophomore. He's a senior now. And one day in the quad, he said, "Mr. Ball, can I talk to you about some grading? I got some questions." And it turned into, I said, we'll do 30 minutes during our student support time. It ended up being an hour and a half discussion. And we discussed so many different things around leadership, around grading, around assessment. I'm having conversations with this young person that I've had with other high school principals. So it was pretty intense. So I immediately connected Adam with Christopher George to get him on the profile of a learner committee immediately. And he, I believe, is part of the reason why we have some of the things that are attached to our current student learner profile. I want to highlight some of the ways that we're facilitating our student growth while living our vision and mission as well. First of all, I want to start off with my admin team as well. We take our role as instructional leaders extremely seriously, and each of my assistant principals has a hand in supporting staff and students and parent groups. Just to highlight those, Ms. Yanez taps into her organizational skills to support our ASB leadership program. Mrs. Taft is an expert in special education and is dialed into our programs there. Ms. Sexton also thrives with increasing student voice and has done an amazing job with our ELD and ELAC programs. Mr. Ross, our latest assistant principal of athletics, is really embracing his role as an administrator on our campus and coordinating just about everything on campus. And our newest assistant principal, Ms. Ramsey, has brought a fresh perspective on equity and instructional leadership that's really pushing our team to do the best we can for all of our students. I also want to shout out our the great work that our teacher on special assignment, Ms. Mascot, is doing with attendance, helping us, making sure that we're getting our students on campus, and our attendance is increasing year by year with her support. I also have to give a shout out to the ones that really run the school, our office manager, Ms. Loney, and our lead custodian, Mr. Mariquez. Now, let me jump to some of academic instruction. We're extremely proud of all of our academic offerings, and you see just a few images up on the screen, but we've got a biomedical pathway, engineering pathway, computer science pathways that are very popular for our 10th through 12th graders. CTE courses, including iQuest, with student internships, careers in teaching, culinary business. And our advanced placement program has grown over my time at Cal High. We've seen an increase in our students that are participating and that are taking the tests at the end of the school year and scoring 3s and above. It's been extremely impressive work by our students. We've also established several new courses, and in the last year, we brought back AVID, Advancement via Individual Determination, Peer Advocates, and Korean language. We are always working hard to support all of our students, from those that need extension to those that need an intervention, students that have individualized education plans, as well as those with 504s. We use a variety of data in order to inform our decisions about how we support our students. CASP scores, our universal screeners like MDTP for math and STAR for ELA, formative assessments that go on in the classrooms. All of those help us determine what interventions are needed for our students. As a result, we've built in several opportunities for our students to help their peers, including academic leadership and learning labs. Academic leaderships is led by Ms. Lyon and Ms. Anderson that train students with a variety of skills to help support their classmates. And during their class period, they go into classes all over campus with all different curriculums. During our 4 days of student support, we offer learning labs, and we have students that are in our National Honor Society that push into 8 different classrooms to support with science, math, and world language. Also want to highlight some of our academic success. Here you see pictured over 3 different years, the students that have been recognized as National Merit Scholarship finalists. In the last 3 years, we've had 34 semifinalists. So that's about 11 students that are recognized out of 16,000 across the country. Now, we not only are growing our students in the classroom, but that growth is also important socially and emotionally as well, because they have so much going on at the high school level. So we do a lot of programming to make sure that those needs are met. We have over 120 student-led clubs on our campus, with things that are focused on science, social justice, community service, and other personal interests. The club fair we host is 3 days in the early fall, so our students know what their opportunities are to get involved. We are increasing student leadership on our campus. We've established the initiative of Safe School Ambassadors, which basically provides students the opportunity to reduce mistreatment and improve the climate on our school campus, gives them low-risk ways of intervening when they see something that could be coming up on campus. We've also continued the DENREP program, which allows 2 students from each of our first period classes to have direct contact and provide feedback to our admin team. Students have to manage so many different things, and so we have an extensive wellness center that's pictured there, also known as the Zenden. We have an amazing school counseling team led by Mrs. Keller Hill that does amazing support offerings for both educating our parents and students, topics like graduation requirements and opportunities with careers beyond. Next, something that's also critical to our students' wellness is child nutrition. Our child nutrition team, led by Alanis Guerra, is also a huge component that I want to highlight. The evolution of our meals program has been amazing over my 3 years. My first year, we were struggling to barely serve 800 prepackaged meals in 2 to 3 lines, serving lines in our 30-minute lunch period. Now we're serving between 1,200 and 1,300 meals in about 15 minutes in 4 to 5 lines. The team has just done amazing work, and it's just been iteration after iteration, and they're still trying to perfect their process and want to add more lines, which is amazing. Another great component is our library program. This is the central hub for many of our students. Our library team, Ms. Ogden, Ms. Bailey, and Dr. Regani go above and beyond for our library to not only be a safe spot for our students to work quietly or collaboratively. They also work with our teachers to teach and design lessons and activities, and even put together community book talks like we've got going tomorrow night, and parent nights. They also bring in the fun with makerspace activities, virtual reality and green screen activities, board games, and their annual Mario Kart staff versus student tournament during lunch. Now, the library doesn't get all the fun. I can't pass up the opportunity to highlight some of the traditions that we have at Cal, including our Halloween costume contest. Each department picks a theme. Then at lunch, on Halloween Day, we have a contest and our students vote. We take it very seriously, including our admin team. We go all out. Congratulations to our science department that has been the winner 2 years in a row. This year they were Toy Story and they had an awesome performance during lunch. Um, oh, also, I want to highlight just one thing on here is our annual homecoming parade to show off our fall sports teams and our student royalty to our surrounding community. This fall, the renovation of our home side bleachers of our stadium was complete. The stadium modernization project, made possible by the generous support of Measure D funding and local building funds, has brought significant improvement to our stadium. As you can see, the picture on the left, it's the old bleachers and press box, if that's what you want to call it. And we have expanded our seating capacity by over 600. A new press box with improved sound and upgraded ADA accessibility. We're proud of our upgrade facilities, which support so many of our students. So many of our athletic programs are the tops in Northern California. And they've been recognized on a consistent basis for their performances at the NCS level and even the CIF state level. I also have to highlight our arts programs, marching ensemble, our bands, our orchestra, choir, and drama programs. They're award-winning as well. And I also want to highlight the California Youth Mural Association, which has been highlighted here at the board as well. They began as the Cal High Mural Club, and they've taken their talents across SRVUSD in collaboration with students from other schools to beautify our campuses across the district. They do amazing work. And through the generosity of Seminole Valley Education Fund, we've also been able to pilot an esports program. For those that are unaware, esports, competitive video gaming, and is extremely popular around the world. It's most likely going to be a CIF sport in the future, and we're excited to host 6 gaming stations right now, and hopefully we'll be able to expand that. As I finish up, I want to close by highlighting one of the most important groups on our campus. We couldn't make all of this stuff happen without our parents. Our parent community partnerships drive every single program that we have on campus. We have formal groups like our PTSA, academic, athletic, drama, and instrumental music boosters. And we got just regular old parents that not only invest the time with late nights and early weekend days, manning trailers and snack shacks and cramming untold number of kids into their carpools for activities around the Bay Area and beyond. They're also contributing thousands of dollars a year to help fund classes, teacher grants for classroom activities, food, uniforms, and all sorts of other equipment. So parents, we can't thank you enough for all that you do to make it happen at Cal High. So I just want to thank you for the opportunity to share a little bit about how we support our student community, families in the den at Cal High. Thank you.
Thank you. Does anyone have any questions or comments for Principal Ball?
No, okay, I'll start. Because my kids went through Cal High, so there's a little bit of a special spot for in my heart for Cal and some of the other schools. But thank you for continuing to make Cal High a vibrant, very dynamic community for our students. And yes, with the help of our parent community, it's yeah, it's a great spot. And I still have actually family who attend Cal High. And yeah, we can't say enough about all your and your teachers and staff, their efforts with the school and the programs. Thank you.
You came in as principal at Cal High at a really hard time, and you have done an amazing job of developing and building on the foundation that was already there. And I can see by such a well-rounded high school, in all the programs and the sports and the performing arts, you have all of it going on. I always enjoy my time there. I'll be there this week for iQuest, And that is a program that I would love to see in all of our high schools. I think it's amazing. I think it's a great opportunity for young people to hone their skills when they, when they get out there to get into a career. So I thank you and your staff and all of your administrators and teachers for everything you've done to make Cal High a shining star, truly.
Just to add on to what Shelley said, I couldn't agree more, but I love how you started with the legacy. It just says so much about who you are and the kind of leader that you are and how you acknowledged all the different contributors to the greatness of Cal High. As a Cal High parent alum, it was really great to see how it has all continued, just evolved. And as Shelley said, you did come in a rough time and you've had your share of struggles, but you have just led with mastery. And I just love reading the updates about the school, and it's just so nice to see it continuing in such solid hands with such a great staff and great students.
So coming from school to high school, what's your favorite thing about being principal at high school?
I love being able to have conversations about, careers and colleges and the different opportunities that students have beyond, just, being able to talk things, beyond Pokemon and those types of things.
Yeah.
Pokemon's great. But I just enjoy the high school level, the maturity and being able to have, those
Yeah.
real conversations.
Yeah, no, that's cool. And it comes out in your programs too, just the robustness of that, of you're really ready to launch these kids off into the thing that's next, which is really cool. And I love that about what you presented tonight. So thank you.
I'd really like to thank you for your leadership on creating a more well-rounded education. It's so incredible to see that the focus on education is more than just being about academics or school, but about forming complete, whether it's complete students, right? Whether it's leaders, performers, athletes. I really love to see the focus on emphasizing that everyone has something to contribute and creating programs that really root people and root students in the educational community. As a student myself, I really see sometimes, like, especially for athletes or people who are participating in things like speech and debate or band, it's programs like this that really give students that energy to want to come to class every day. It makes them excited about being part of this community in our district. And I'm so grateful for your work in that area and continuing to make the Cal High and high school community as a whole more vibrant and exciting for our students.
Yeah, and I think community is kind of a key word. My family followed you from Iron Horse to Cal, and so we've had a lot of really great experiences in the communities that you build, and seeing the as a parent, from my perspective as a parent, seeing the way that you're responsive and you're able to also kind of hold a firm hand so that we can kind of come through and come together and then create this wonderful space for our students to learn and thrive is really awesome. I've had kids that have been active in athletics, kids that have done the biomed pathway, kids that have been active in clubs and in the arts, and they all have found their niche at Cal. And to have a community that allows for every student to be able to find themselves is incredibly powerful and what we want for our school district. So thank you, to your staff, to your parent volunteers, to the students, to the student leaders, as well as the students in the classroom. We just appreciate the entire community at Cal. So good job. Awesome. Thank you. All right, so next we will move on to 10.2 resolution, which is Inclusive Schools Week, which is January 13th to the 17th. And that is our SALPA Executive Director, Linda Rowley-Tom.
Good evening. It's nice to see all of you. Thank you for having me this evening. I am excited to be here to talk about our third Inclusive Schools Week. That'll be coming up January 13th through 17th after the new year. We are excited to celebrate Inclusive Schools Week because it really highlights our students with disabilities and how we strive to model respect, empathy, and high expectations for those students. We do that all year long, but during Inclusive Schools Week, each of our 35 schools really focuses in on the ways in which they celebrate inclusion all the time at their schools, and the focus is on our students with disabilities. When we look at Inclusive Schools Week, the reason that the resolution was brought forward was really to again highlight the inclusive practices we have happening at our school sites, but to talk about specifically the ways in which our students with disabilities really participate in campus life, but frankly, really add to campus life. The spark that they provide, the dynamics that they provide, and the importance of remembering that every student needs to be held to those high expectations, because each of our students can thrive and progress in the way that is the best for them. So during Inclusive Schools Week, you might remember our logo from last year that we are utilizing again this year, that inclusion matters at SRVUSD. And this graphic was designed by our PTA Exceptional Education Committee. We wear it proudly on our t-shirts during Inclusive Schools Week, and our SELPA Community Advisory Committee also supports our efforts. Our former inclusion specialist, Kara Teach, created a wealth of resources which have been added to over time for our teachers to utilize in their classrooms to support activities in Inclusive Schools Week, things like videos, lesson plans, read alouds. But most importantly, each of our school sites celebrates Inclusive Schools Week in a unique way. We actually have surveyed each of our principals this fall to get them thinking about how they will celebrate. And these are some of the ways our sites are planning to celebrate during our week in January. Many of our schools last year created a mural representing inclusion, and several of our schools are planning to again do that collective activity at their school site. Some of our school sites will be having a school-wide spirit week that'll be run by student leadership. And some of our schools will provide lessons on inclusivity, ability awareness, including simulation activities, and kindness. Other schools will create a school-wide inclusion awareness bulletin board. I think the thing that's important to remember is that just like our students are unique, the celebrations at each of our schools will be unique. Some of our high school students are planning to lead discussions about inclusivity for the middle school students, actually going to our middle schools to have collaborative conversations with them. And many of our schools will participate in school-wide read-alouds and best buddy activities. Across our district, we have differing ways in which students partner and peer tutor each other. At some of our schools, it's a formalized program like the Comrades program at San Ramon Valley High School. At other schools at the elementary level, they utilize the Best Buddies program where older students go into the younger classrooms. And for those classes where we have full-time special education programs, those classes have buddies as well that go in and support them in their classrooms. Again, disability awareness stations will be available to students to engage in simulation activities at some of our sites. And at one of our sites, they're planning to create a video done solely by special education students that'll be shown to the entire school. And these are just some of the ways our 35 schools are planning to participate. You may remember last year that part of what we did as a collaboration with PTA Exceptional Education Committee and the Community Advisory Committee was create bookmarks that we purchased for every student and every staff member in the district. I still see those out in my travels when I'm visiting schools. And truly, this statement is really what Inclusive Schools Week embodies. It's the statement that's on our bookmarks, and that's that education takes on a beautiful shape when all students are included. And that's truly the meaning of Inclusive Schools Week, and what we hope is not only embodied during the week of the 13th through 17th in January, but all year long. Thank you for letting me come this evening and talk a little bit about what is planned for our week in January. And I again appreciate your time. I'm open to any questions.
Thank you. Does anyone have any questions or comments?
Would you please share the video that the students would?
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
We'll be gathering all of the resources that are created and trying to go out and take as many pictures and asking people to share with us. Absolutely.
Okay, and any other comments, questions? I just want to say thank you, and I know that Rachel and I are part of the CAC Community Advisory Committee, and we're liaisons, and the work that they're doing too, and bringing in students as part of the board, I think has been transformative, just like it has with everything that we've done with students. So I really appreciate all the work that you're doing, and I'm looking forward to that week. So
Thank you. Appreciate that. All right. Good evening.
All right, thank you, Linda. All right, so now we will move on to public comment for non-agendized items. So this item is for non-agendized, so that means that we don't have an agenda item for this, and you can speak about anything within our jurisdiction. During the non-agendized public comment, the board cannot respond to comments because the topics have not been published on the agenda prior to the meeting. So I'm going to take a second and ask if anyone has any, we do have 2 cards. If anyone has any additional cards, if you could bring that up while the first speaker is speaking, and then that will be the end of collecting those cards. So we first have Mike Arata, and after Mike Arata is Sam Chegg.
Last year, SRVUSD had a remarkable 77 National Merit Scholarship qualifiers. Those students among roughly the top 1% nationally in their PSAT scores. 95% of them had Asian surnames, mostly Chinese and Indian. This year, there were 20 fewer National Merit qualifiers here, but students with Asian surnames were still 91% of that total. Similar achievement is reflected in EdSource's posting of the district's race-defined cohorts for this year's state test scores shown in the sign. The line and dot graph on the left is for English with math on the right. The numbers shown are the year-by-year percentages of your students who met or exceeded state standards in those tests. The tests were not administered in COVID year 2020. They were optional in 2021, causing the sharp upward and downward 2021 spikes you see, since few took the test that year. The top dotted line in each graph in dark green represents the percentage of Asian students who met or exceeded state standards. Working downward, the next line in dots are for whites, then for Hispanic students, and finally for African American students. Notice that for all groups, the highest performing percentages were during 2015 through 2019. The lowest percentages meeting or exceeding standards were for 2023 and 24. Even your Asian student cohort has dropped significantly since 2019. And the Asian kids, now at 85.7%, met or exceeded standards in English and 84.8% in math, showed lowest numbers last year and this year during all the time that those tests have been administered. Those were still much better percentages than for the other racial groups, thereby raising overall district marks since Asian students are now 44% of your student population. I wondered what the met or exceeded percentages would be without your high achieving Asian students, i.e. your white, Hispanic, and Black students. So I reran the district's numbers, the CASP numbers, and left out the Asian cohort. The result is shown in the second sign using 2019 and 2024 met or exceeded percentages in order to include state science tests, which were newly administered in 2019. Note overall drop-offs from 2019 to 2024 and substantial further drop-offs when results are limited to white, Hispanic, and African American students. One major school program change during these last 5 years, has been your ill-considered overemphasis on equity. Instead of a rising tide lifting all boats, you've essentially created a sinkhole whirlpool that is drawing down all your students to ever lower performance. So instead of overtly racist anti-racism, LGBTQ grooming of even kindergartners, depraved pornography in high school libraries, and other forms of indoctrination, you should return to a concentrated focus on academic basics, the teaching and learning of beneficial knowledge and skills.
Thank you, Mr. Arata. Next up, we have Sam Chegg. I'm sorry, Cheyenne. I'm sorry. I saw it. Oh, Sean. Oh, okay.
Good evening, board members. Thank you for taking our public comment. We are the Conservation Exploration Club from Jordy Valley High School. My name is Ben. And my name is Sean. Our school suffers from large amounts of food waste and littering due to lack of responsibility regarding our waste management program. Although there are trash and recycling bins throughout the campus, all bins are emptied into the same landfill without separation. This issue was concerning to us as a club, so we decided to look into how much of an impact our school may have on the environment. According to CalRecycle, the average Californian generates about 31.5 pounds of trash per week. Doherty Valley High School produces an average of 54.9 tons of trash per week, enough to cover a football field. There is most likely more trash taken into account school lunches, disposed school materials, school events, and clubs. These are concerns that our club and many other students share at Doherty Valley, as well as our school janitors. When speaking with the Doherty Valley janitor, Mr. Wilson, who collects around 60 bins per week, we learned that school doesn't separate recycling and trash, partially due to a lack of janitorial staff. Most importantly, he expressed frustration regarding the lack of funding for environmental literacy among students. While the tri-bin system, composed of trash, recycling, and compost, is important, the change must come from the students themselves. We need the means of protecting the environment, but also the care and respect for nature to do so. Whilst researching how the district handles waste management in schools, we realized that wording is very loose in Regulation 3511.1, Integrated Waste Management, which we believe is largely the cause of this inaction. Many parts of the regulation fail to acknowledge or are too vague to initiate any activity for poor waste management. Negligence to include such information within the regulation contributes to the absence of the tri-bin system at our schools, negatively impacting the natural and school environment. Incorrect disposal of waste has a number of effects on the school community, ranging from human health to mental health. By not providing the means to sort and remove waste correctly, we deprive students of the nurturing community they need to learn and grow. It also does not set a good example to younger generations to respect and care for the environment, which are traits that are urgently needed in this world of rising environmental issues. With this in mind, the most straightforward solution is to revise Regulation 3511.1 with clarity to the wording and clearer goals for the future. We have brought such revisions for the board members to see, and this will promote stronger measures that protect the natural and educational environments of students in the district. With these revisions in place, we predict many benefits to both people and the environment from a reduction of waste. If we achieve a 20% decrease in tons of trash, we will reduce the amount of trash that ends up in landfills by 11 tons. Furthermore, we will prevent up to 330 pounds of CO2 emissions and keep our campuses and communities clean. We hope that the board members will accept the revisions to Regulation 3511.1 in an effort to pave a road toward a more sustainable community. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. All right, so next we will move to 10.4, which is Association President's Report. I don't know if Carrie's here, Tammy. Okay. So Laura Finko with Servia.
I was just saying, I'm like so impressed, gentlemen. If more of our public speakers came in with solution orientated requests for our board, awesome work. Thank you, guys. Good evening. We respectfully acknowledge that the land we gather on, known today as the San Ramon Valley, is the ancestral and unceded territory of the Bay Miwok people, specifically the Takan and Sunan tribes. We honor their enduring connection to this land, their contributions to its stewardship, and their ongoing presence in this region. My name is Laura Finko. I come before you tonight as the president of our teachers union, representing the dedicated educators who work tirelessly every day to provide the best possible education for our students. I want to echo my congratulations to those recognized this evening, a true array of talent and humanitarianism. Highlighting our schools, hearing about the awesome work being done in our classrooms and beyond, one can only imagine why we as educators tend to put on a bit of defense sometimes when we feel that what we do is threatened. We understand that discussions about budgets are never easy, especially in times of uncertainty. However, I want to remind everybody here this evening that budgets are projections, not certainties. They are tools designed to guide us, not straitjackets that force us into rash decisions. A projected deficit doesn't always translate into an actual crisis. We must carefully assess where adjustments are necessary and distinguish between temporary fluctuations and structural changes. When we react too quickly by cutting resources, we jeopardize the foundation of our schools, our students. Every dollar cut from a classroom, every program eliminated, every educator position reduced has real, tangible consequences. Cuts just don't trim excess, they undermine opportunities. They reduce access to art, music, and sports. They increase class sizes, leaving teachers struggling to provide individualized attention. They diminish the quality of services for students who need extra support, whether it be special education or mental health. The question we must ask ourselves is this: are we willing to balance a budget on the backs of our students? I urge this board to ask thoughtful, critical questions and hold management accountable during this process. How were these projections developed? Have we explored all revenue streams before considering cuts? What is the plan to secure a higher level of ADA such as we had pre-COVID? What are the long-term consequences of these decisions? And are they aligned with our mission to provide every child with a quality education? These are the types of questions that honor the trust the community has placed in you. I also encourage transparency and collaboration. Teachers and staff have invaluable insight in how cuts impact the day-to-day operations of our schools. Involve us. I know you will, but involve us in these conversations and not just through district committees. Together, we can find creative solutions that prioritize student needs without eroding the school support systems they rely on. This moment requires courage, not just to make hard decisions, but to make right decisions. Those that preserve and strengthen the educational experiences of the young people we serve. Let's commit to working together for the future of our schools and our communities. Our kids are counting on you. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. All right, so next we have 10.5 student board members report. That's our student board member, Travis Hodges.
Thank you. Well, to begin with, I've been pretty busy at the Budget Advisory Committee meetings, as well as with our LCAP and grade reform committees. We just finished up the work with the BAC, and I'd like to thank our great superintendent for his leadership on that. I think that we had some really productive discussions. I know that this has been a very difficult conversation, but it was great, and I appreciate your leadership, especially in involving students in all that we do. Additionally, doing work with our committees. Our LCAP committee and grade reform committees continue to do amazing work for our students, and that was great to see. I also had the privilege of attending our student senate meeting, and I got to hear updates from each of our school sites. Ramping up into these final weeks before winter break, it seems that almost all of our school sites are running donations to sister schools. And this has been really great to see. So students all across our district have been involved in creating these donation drives to help fundraise and create Christmas gifts for those who maybe are less fortunate. And that's been really inspiring to see. Something else that happened at this meeting was our district nutrition team came in to visit, and we started brainstorming ways to help foster greater student engagement and helping come up with our lunch menus and how our processes for how students are getting their food. This also ties in with the conversation we were able to hear earlier about managing waste better and becoming more efficient at that. So that was a great conversation we were able to have. In addition to that, I've continued to receive input from the community and have been working with some student groups in guiding their efforts to help make our district a better place and connect them with the right people. And that's been mostly it. And now just a couple more weeks before winter break. And I think a lot of students, not to speak on behalf of all of them, but most of them are pretty much busy studying for finals. So, yeah.
Thank you, Travis. All right, next up is 10.6 Superintendent's Report, and that's Superintendent CJ Kamick.
Thank you very much. It seems like it's been a while because we had the fall break in between, but prior to the break, really enjoyed some visits at Bollinger Canyon, Twin Creeks, and Iron Horse. Really enjoyed attending the event. It was the first time I'd been at that event, Dream Makers and Risk Takers. Board Member Clark was there and Board Member Ordway was there. Got to see some of our students from two of our high schools be acknowledged for their incredible work. Was another constant reminder that I don't think I worked hard enough in high school compared to some of the excellence that we see in our students. And really enjoyed attending the PTA Reflections event last week. Loved to see how our PTA and our families are supporting what we know helps kids be successful, which is a connection to school. And for some students, that happens on the athletic field. For some, it might be on the stage. And for others, it's through art and other means of expression. Really cool to see the projects that were demonstrated. And this past week, we had the opportunity to attend the CSBA conference. It was a pleasure to be there with the Board of Education. Important to receive a number of the legal updates, and as a common theme you'll hear tonight and through our future meetings, also got some fiscal updates from the Legislative Analyst's Office. And we are in the time of year where we will make our first interim budget report tonight. We will have a meeting the following week where I will present budget recommendations for reductions. And the other piece that comes forward is right around January 10th or so, we start to see the governor's budget proposal. The Legislative Analyst's Office has recently completed their report, which helps inform that. And there's sometimes a difference between the Legislative Analyst's Office and the Department of Finance. But the important note from the Legislative Analyst's Office was that they are seeing some strength in the economy, but they're calling it soft. And it was interesting to hear some of the state officials at the conference say that they're expecting it to be a good year. But I think it's really important that we look at that in context, because as they described a good year, they clarified that a good year was a year they didn't have to cut education. So that doesn't mean that a good year means we're going to get substantively more revenue. We did hear that in our budget adoption, we know next year we have 2.9% roughly that's projected as our COLA, because that was set forward as the state dartboard. And we heard from the Legislative Analyst's Office that they expect that to move downward next year to 2.4. And school services representatives estimated that it may even be around 2.2. So there's a little bit of a challenge there, as you can imagine, but we will keep our eyes peeled and our ears to the ground for every development that we can find around the state budget and what it means for us at the local level. And that concludes my update. I'm sorry. One more thing. I forgot to mention how incredibly awesome our team did along with Board Member Hurd at a session for CSBA, where they presented on the work that's happened in this district long before I got here around aligning to the science of reading. And I want to thank Courtney, Deanna, and Annabelle and Board Member Hurd for their presentation. In a California School Boards Association, I see a lot of board members attending events on legal updates and the budget, not so much on instruction. But we know the science of reading has been a focal point of conversation in the education circle in recent years. And they gave this group a huge room and they filled it up with an incredible audience, and they delivered an out of this park presentation. So really proud to be a part of that group.
Yeah, and I'll add that there were several times that I would meet someone, they'd ask me what school district I was from, and I said San Ramon Valley, and they're like, "Oh, you were the district that did the Science of Reading program." So it was seen widely and appreciated for sure. All right, so we'll move on to action items and public hearings. 11.1, consideration of approval of Board of Education meeting calendar for 25-26. Superintendent Knapp.
Thank you very much. So for those who follow along year over year, we know there's a few of you. And for those of you who may be following along new, this is the time of year where two things happen. We set forward our meetings for the next year, and we establish what committees the board members will be serving on. This is also the time of year where we will have the newly elected or re-elected board members take their oath of office, and our board may change positions in terms of who's president and vice president. There's Ed Code and Government Code that's very specific about when that has to happen after the election, and the appropriate window for that reorganization of the board will happen on the 19th. But we are going to take care of some other elements of business today. The first is setting up our calendar of meetings for the 2025-2026 school year. And so the board has been presented with a draft of meeting dates. And we have had a request to look from one of our board members to look at changing the February 17th, 2026 date, as that is falling on the Lunar New Year. And would recommend potentially considering February 24th as an alternative date for that board meeting.
Is President's Day weekend that year 15, 16, 17? Oh, so I'm
Yeah.
sorry, I'm not looking at
President's Day,
26, I'm
16th.
looking at 25th.
It is, President's Day weekend is the, President's Day is on the 16th.
Good, so we don't interfere with that. So that
Correct.
sounds like a good solution.
Yeah, works for me. Anyone else have any thoughts?
Yeah, no, thank you for taking that.
Yeah,
consideration.
All right, any other concerns about other dates, or do we want a motion with the amended calendar?
I'll make a motion to accept the calendar with the one change to in the February meeting to the 24th.
I'll second that.
The motion was made by Board Member Clark and seconded by Board Member Van Zee. Roll call vote. Student Board Member Hodges.
Aye.
Board Member Hurd.
Aye.
Board Member Van Zee.
Aye.
Board Member Ordway.
Aye.
Board Member Clark.
Aye.
Board Member Brack.
Aye.
Motion passes 5-0.
Great, thank you. All right, so next 11.2, board school site liaison schedule and committee assignments for 25-26. Superintendent Knapp.
Thank you very much. So this item represents something that was approved, I believe, back in August of 2023, and that's the rotation pattern for our board school site liaison schedule. This carries forward through the 2027-28 school year. It is here for the board's consideration this evening. And in addition, within this same item, as we know, our board members participate in various committees in their representative roles for the board. And this would be the opportunity where we would look at the committee assignments for the next year as well. So I'll turn it over to the board to engage in discussion on both of those items.
First with the first part of it with the liaison schools, does anyone have any?
I just
Concerns
think
about
we
that?
should make a point to clarify that this doesn't change what we're doing for this school year. This would be next school year, just because the time of year for this is kind of confusing.
Yeah. So it starts in I guess July, August, end of July, August for of 25-26.
And I think we looked at this pretty thoroughly
Yeah.
last time, and yeah,
Don't touch it.
I know.
Rachel spent a
I
lot of
don't
time.
wanna do that, Rachel.
And we do have the just to kind of to clarify for public. So we have, we're by area, and one of the mandates, the request by the board that managed that districting process was to really make sure that we as board members look at the district broadly and we're not just siloed in our own areas. And I can say actually, again, coming from the State School Board Association conference, just speaking with other board members and how in that districting, they've really become kind of stuck in their corner and siloed around their area. And so I think we as a board and the board before Shelley and I that kind of talked through that really helped set the standard for how we as board members really see the district broadly. And then also, as we discussed back in, I guess, 23, when we kind of redid this, was also allowing us to focus on our area by doing some of the more, being able to go to some of the more celebratory kind of events, the concerts and those kinds of things, and focusing on our area in that way, which has been helpful as well. So I just wanted to clarify that process. So with that, do we want to move to the liaisons? Does anyone have any thoughts or any requests for shifting or anything? I can start. I'm good with everything. I would be comfortable moving away from equity if someone wants that. But I'm also happy to stay on. I enjoy that committee, but I've been on it for a while and it's always good to move around as well. So.
I'm pretty comfortable where I am. I have a few initiatives that I'm curious, like that I'm interested in, especially in deep learning and innovation. And I'm kind of going deeper into the conversations of how do we create policy and practice around AI. So I kind of want to stay there.
I'm pretty happy where I am too. Similar reason.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah,
You get involved,
know,
when you
it's-
start,
yeah,
and then you
yeah.
kind of don't want to leave.
yeah.
So I don't know if anybody else wants, is there something that you particularly want to focus on that you don't have?
I'm happy where I am, but I'm happy to change if anybody wants one of my steering committees, but I think we're all pretty vested
Yeah.
once we're on.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. All right, good. Okay.
Susanna, did you get to say what you wanted to say though?
Yeah, no, I'm comfortable where I am also, unless, you know, one of the, you would like to step off of strategic arts, that would be what
Oh.
I would be interested, but I'm okay.
Yeah, I would be okay with stepping off of that. I mean, I've enjoyed it, but I also know that we only have 2 meetings and it's there's only 2 of us and it's yeah, I know you have that background as well, so I would be happy to hand it off to you for next year. Yeah.
Great, thank you.
Right. Okay, so I guess
I move
that's
approval of continuing our liaison school rotation as planned and then approving the liaison committee assignments as they are with the one exception of Susanna moving to the arts one, strategic arts.
I'll second that.
The motion was made by Board Member Hurd and seconded by Board Member Clark. Roll call vote. Student Board Member Hodges.
Aye.
Board Member Hurd.
Aye.
Board Member Van Zee.
Aye.
Board Member Ordway.
Aye.
Board Member Clark.
Aye.
Board Member Pratt.
aye.
The motion passes 5-0.
Right. So next we move to 11.3, consideration of nomination for California School Boards Association Region 7 delegate. And I'm passing that off to Board Member Hurd.
Okay, so if you recall, we had an appointed delegate position through CSBA because we were a district of 30,000 students. Now that we've dropped below 30,000, we were notified last year that that was going to go away, but they gave it to us for 1 more year just to keep things balanced in the delegate assembly. But we found out when Susanna and I were at delegate assembly last week that that change is going into effect for this coming year. So Susanna would like to remain a delegate, so she now needs to be elected in the at-large process that we usually participate in, where we get to elect 3 each year, and they are 2-year terms that stagger. So this is an action for us as a board to nominate Susanna for one of the at-large positions, and then she'll run in that process. So I would like to nominate Susanna. I would like our board to nominate Susanna Ordway for a CSBA delegate position.
I will second that.
The motion was made by Board Member Hurd and seconded by Board Member Van Zee. Roll call vote. Student Board Member Hodges.
Aye.
Board Member Hurd.
Aye.
Board Member Van Zee.
Aye.
Board Member Ordway.
I get to vote too.
Aye.
Sure. Board Member Clark.
Aye.
Board Member Pratt.
Aye.
The motion passes 5-0.
All right, great, thanks.
So we just need to take care of filling out that form and Susanna filling out the bio sheet. Great, thank you.
All right, so next is 11.4, consideration of adoption of resolution number 55, 2425, approval of provisional internship permit PIP requests. And I know that our Assistant Superintendent Melanie Jones is out sick today, so Superintendent CJ Knack will be taking over.
Thank you very much. So the board has seen these come before you for consideration in prior meetings and multiple times in prior years. There is a provision that requires the approval of a PIP take place in an open agenda item in front of the public. We have 2 individuals for consideration this evening, one in Neil Armstrong, one at Golden View, both in SDC moderate courses, and staff is recommending approval of the provisional internship permits.
Like to move it.
Well, let me have a quick question. Sorry, Susanna. So, we've probably discussed this before, but it's been a while. What are we doing as a district, to support these individuals that are under a PIP gain full credential? Or do we have a program around that? What are we doing?
We do. So in conjunction with our special education team and with our ed services team, we do provide training for teachers who are coming on a PIP along both at the site level and then through our district team as well.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, then I will move the motion to approve.
I'll second.
The motion was made by Board Member Ordway and seconded by Board Member Clark. Roll call vote. Student Board Member Hodges.
Aye.
Board Member Hurd.
Aye.
Board Member Van Zee,
Aye.
Board Member Ordway,
Aye.
Board Member Clark,
Aye.
Board Member Bratt.
Aye.
Motion passes 5-0.
Thank you. 11.5, consideration of acceptance of the 24-25 first interim financial report and adoption of resolution number 57, 24-25 authorizing ongoing budget balancing solutions. Assistant Superintendent of Business Services, Danny Hillman.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Okay. Greetings and thank you for this opportunity to present to you the 24-25 first interim budget report. As I'm starting this conversation, I'm going to ask our executive director, Evan Miller, to come down, and he's just going to sit up here and backstop me in case there's additional questions that you might have, and then that way we're ready to go as we get into the presentation. As Evan is getting set up, I just wanted to take this opportunity and kind of just talk for just a second about what the first interim budget is. This is really our first formal opportunity to discuss with the board and the public what's changed in our budget since the assumptions that built the 2024-25 budget were developed in the springtime. And then the board took action to adopt the budget. There's been a lot of action at the state level, new information coming out. There's been new information that we've discovered here locally. And so this is our first formal opportunity to really dive into this year's budget and show you what's changed. And so that's going to be the focal point of this presentation tonight. There's a couple of other things we're going to talk about. I'm going to go over the budget timeline so that you and the public get a refresher of what we're looking at, why we're looking at it. We'll go over the first interim overview. We'll look at multi-year projections, MYP, which is it's a requirement of these interim check-ins. We have to do an MYP. It's a 3-year look ahead, the current year plus 2. That'd be the 25-26 year and the 26-27 year. And then we'll look at and talk about the budget certification, fiscal outlook, and future considerations, and then some next steps. So as I mentioned, the first interim is the first formal check-in. You can see that this is the cycle. Every single year we go through this cycle. We have the adopted budget. It goes active July 1st, but it's built before July 1st. It's built in April and May of last school year. Evan and his team are meeting with school sites. They're meeting with departments, building the assumptions and the budget itself. It takes many weeks to do. And then after we go through the rigmarole of what the state does, we as a district have to come back within 45 days after July 1st and adopt or change anything that the state did or decisions they made. And we have to reflect that in our budget within 45 days. So that thing is called the 45-day revise. That typically happens in the summertime, August, typically around when school starts. And then first interim, what we're doing tonight is looking at the financial activity from the beginning of the fiscal year, July 1st, all the way through October 31st. And we're legally required to do that before December 15th. So we made the deadline. Yay, today's the 10th. And then after this, our next formal look at the budget will be second interim. That'll be in March, and that's looking at activity through January 31st. So if you're thinking about this in the rest of the world, non-education, this is kind of like your quarterly report. Every 3 months or so, you're going to get a financial update. That's pretty much what this is. So first interim. The purpose of first interim is, I mentioned this already, it's the first of the 2 required interim reports. It's part of the checks and balances that the county wants to make sure that we're doing, but it's also the fiduciary responsibility of the elected trustees and the Board of Education to do this checks and balance with staff of our budget. It's required. It includes a review of financials and a review of criteria and standards associated with fiscal stability and solvency. So if you look at the packet that's in the board agenda, there's hundreds of pages in there, and you'll notice a lot of it is financial data, but the criteria and standards are in there too. And they're basically yes, no questions and answers because it's checking for fiscal solvency. So that's checking things like, did you have a new superintendent and CBO join your district in the last 6 months? Well, in our case, yes. So they check the box, yes. If it looks at the attendance rate, it looks at enrollment, it looks at all these different questions because it's a way for us to self-analyze. Do we have other risk factors that we need to take into consideration? And also it gives the county a view into what's going on in our district as well. It's the same standardized forms for all public school districts in the state, by the way. This isn't unique to us or our county. Every district has to do it. Every county has to do it. The certification portion is also part of the first interim report. And the Board of Education gets the opportunity to self-certify the report as either positive, qualified, or negative. And we're going to talk about that. I have a slide on that that details that out. If you sat on the board for a while, which all of you now have for a few years, you're used to this. But if someone's watching from home for the first time, I wanted to be able to review that. The process of this first interim report, it starts here with board adoption, board action. It then goes to our county office of ed for certification, and then they send it off to Sacramento, and California Department of Education looks at it. So that's the workflow, that's the process. And this happens with, again, every single interim report. Okay, so here is the first set of numbers. This is the first interim general fund overview. We're focusing on our general fund, Fund 1, because it is the major fund where most of our activity takes place. This is not in the SACS form. This is a different summary that we used this year, and so I'll step through it. But for revenues, you can see that at the adopted budget, that first column of $442 million, it's changed. The first interim is in the light blue. The next column over is the change, so you can see it's $11 million, 11.4, and then you get a percentage change. So that's the way the slide is set up. You can see that our revenues have increased by $11 million. The next line down, our expenditures, you can see that those increased by $22 million. And then we break out the expenditures in several different lines there. So there's certificated salaries. Those are our salaries covered by individuals who hold a credential, typically our teachers, librarians, etc., counselors. We have salaries classified, which are our employees who don't need a credential to do their job. So we're talking about our clerical staff, our custodians, etc. Our benefits for those employees, non-personnel expenditures, so that's the stuff. And then you can also see how our enrollment changed, our ADA, and our dollars per student. So I'll just step through it very quickly. Our salaries for certificated went up by about $3.5 million. Our classified salaries went down by about $3 million. Our benefits went down by 1.5. Our non-personnel expenditures went up by 23 million. I'll come back to that in a second, because I know you're going to ask the question, so I'll just preempt it and try to explain it for you. And then our enrollment has decreased a little bit, about 92. Our average daily attendance ratio was close to what we projected at 95.97. It's down a little bit, 95.5. And so when you bake all those calculations, the dollars per student, at adopted budget, we were expecting about 15,400 per student. We're getting a little bit more than that, 15,850. So we're within about 3% there, $450 more per student. Let me go back to the non-personnel expenditures, because this is a question that gets asked a lot. And one of the things that I wanted to point out about this number is that when we adopt the budget you take action in June as a board and it goes live July 1st, what the budget doesn't include for the stuff, the non-personnel expenditures, are any of the monies that the school sites and the departments didn't spend last fiscal year. That's not in the budget at the very beginning, because Evan and his team are still closing the books for the 23-24 school year. So at first interim, this is the first opportunity where we get to formalize carryover. So if a school site got a donation, and we have millions of dollars in donations that our community is very generously giving to our school sites every year, if a school site didn't spend that year, they get to carry it over to the next year. And so that's why you see this change in the number between adopted budget. It doesn't have last year's carryover, but at first interim, it does. And so we close the books. We say, hey, you didn't spend all your money that you received in donations or that we allocated to you. We'll let you carry it over and you can spend it in this year. That's why this number swings so much. There's also another element that's in this non-personnel expenditure, and it links to the salary classified going down. You've heard at the dais some various speakers and the superintendent and others talk about where we've had some positions in special education that we could not fill. So at this point in the year, if we have a position that we haven't filled and we don't think we're going to fill it, this is the opportunity where we leave the job posted, but we're taking it out of the budget and we're moving that dollar amount, in this case, to a non-personnel expenditure, because we have to go hire an agency or a firm to fulfill that service to students that have IEPs. So that's another factor that's embedded in that 23 million, is the movement of us having to pay a service, a non-public agency, to cover the services that we couldn't hire for.
So it's still people, it's just not our people, it's people we're contracting out for.
That is absolutely correct.
Okay. And so that number, the 23 million increase, that's not necessarily money that has been spent. It's just in the expenditure line to spend.
Correct.
Okay.
That's right. The other thing that's included in here too is a lot of restricted dollars. So as an example, I just mentioned SPED and that switch to non-public agencies. That's $9.6 million of that 23. So that's a pretty big chunk. The other big chunk that's in there is, I'll find it. Site level donations, $6 million. So that's being carried over. So if you just add the $6 million and the $9 million, that's 15 of the 23. That's the largest, those two largest chunks of why the number is moving. It's mainly we're rebudgeting that carryover so that school sites and departments can spend the money again. So that's why you're seeing this change. So I wanted to explain that because if I was you, that jumps out. Like, why did we have a 38% increase? Well, because we're budgeting the carryover.
Danny, can you also lean into the classified certificated salaries? I know it's an increase of less than 2%, but can you kind of explain the dynamic that's happening there as well?
Yeah, I think at certificated salaries, and this is where I'm going to lean on Evan because he's been here for the whole fiscal year and I haven't. So on that, we had a couple of things that changed since budget adoption, if you could speak to it.
Yeah, so the main thing on certificated salaries are something that we have talked about a couple times. When we closed the books, we had a miss on salaries. We have increased that to adjust our budget for the current year. So we are trying, we're normalizing towards what we saw last
Okay,
year.
so, but we understand
Yeah,
what happened in the calculation and this is an adjustment. for
particular,
that.
it was
Okay.
substitutes, stipends, and vacancies. It was some of these other, not sort of salaries, but kind of other associated costs with certificated. I mean, they're certificated salaries, but they are not the monthly paycheck. It is additional funds for subs, stipends, vacancies, extra hours, things like that.
Okay, I just, when I saw it, I was like, ooh, did we figure it all out? And you answered my question, we did. Okay,
Yes.
thank you.
Yes, we did. So moving away from this slide to the next slide, there's a little bit more detail here. And so again, this isn't in any sort of SACS format or anything like that. This is just a summary that we did internally, but here's some details on the revenue change. So from that last slide, you have one row that talks about $11.4 million in additional revenue. Well, this is how it breaks down and where it's coming from. And the thing that I'd like to point out here is of the 11.4, this is combined unrestricted and restricted. And you can see that the majority of the additional revenue is on the restricted side of the house, right? We've got a $6.4 million increase, restricted state program grants that's coming from CalShape and the California Teachers Commission. We've got another 2.2 in site restricted revenue. That's going to be, I believe, additional carryover because it's site restricted, site donations. Okay. So you can see that we don't have a lot of flexibility here. We've got on the unrestricted side about $1.8 million that came in from LCFF lottery. I know that the lottery numbers, this happened in my last district too. We used a certain number for the lottery prediction and then it came in higher. So all districts kind of won, no pun intended, the lottery on the lottery money. And so it went up a little bit more than we thought. On the expenditure side, we have the detail of the $22.2 million here. You can see it gets into the detail that Evan already talked about to Trustee Hurd's question around unrestricted certificated personnel subs, stipends, and vacancies, $2.9 million increase. We've got some other decreases there on classified personnel, the benefit adjustment for health and welfare and pension and payroll taxes, the things we have to pay for every dollar that we pay an employee, there's fees involved. Special education personnel to contractors, we talked about that. Non-public schools settlements up by 4.5 million. We have the restricted arts and music in schools, Prop 28. That's personnel and supplies that went up, but that's coming from a restricted bucket because it's Prop 28. That's the new law that went into effect. RRM, routine restricted maintenance. That's our required contribution from our general fund to fund RRM. It's just a percentage calculation, so that went up. If our expenses go up, automatically the contribution to RRM goes up. It's just that's how it drives. And some state grants. EEG is Educator Effectiveness Grant. CalShape is a facilities grant. CTC, ELOP, it's an alphabet soup up there of different state grants, as you know. We also have external partner support, ed funds, PTA, site donations, and boosters, 9.8 million. And then miscellaneous of 1.3. So these are the overall, this is additional detail on the expenditure side to show you what's changed. But we talked about most of this on the first slide. Wanted to touch briefly on restricted one-time funds. I think the board has gotten used to over the last 5 or 6 years that we've had lots of one-time dollars with different restrictions, different timelines. It's restricted, it's not restricted. This is what we're down to. This is the last 4. And so educator effectiveness block grant, we adopted at 2.8 at first interim, it's 2.5, so it's down a little bit. You can see they're all down just a touch. In-person instruction grant, the learning recovery emergency block grant, and then the arts, music, and instructional materials discretionary block grant. It's a mouthful. Of these 4, I was going to point out to make sure that everyone is kind of on notice that we are expecting essentially only 2 of these to have money at the end of the year. That's the educator effectiveness grant. There'll be about $1.2 million left. And the learning recovery block grant will have about 2.7 left. And we've got expenditures slated to those 2 buckets in the next 2 years. So we are doing what we're supposed to do with one-time funds and spend them down. And so we're getting to the end of that train. We'll have probably another year to 18 months of expenditures. 2 of these won't be on the list next year, and the other 2 will wind up ending at the end of the 2026 school year. So let's take a look at the MYP. One thing I wanted to start with is that I think everyone at this point knows and remembers that the main driver for our revenue is students. And so one of the very interesting things that happened coming out of the pandemic was we had that thing called the hold harmless. And so I just wanted to animate this a little bit to try to point this out, because some people are asking, well, why are we in the situation that we're in? One of the main drivers is on this chart right here. And so the yellow line is our average daily attendance. That's what we get paid on from the state. The upper blue line is our enrollment. That's our actual kids on the books. But the difference between the 2 is our percentage of kids who didn't show up. We get paid on the yellow line. You'll notice that in 2020-21, the yellow line is higher than the blue line. How is that possible? How did more kids show up than we had on the books? It's because the state allowed us to carry forward that hold harmless and get paid on last year's number. So this little call out here, the red thing, I don't even know what that's called. It's not really a circle, but this abnormality here helped us. It helped all districts, because the 2023-24 green circle that I just clicked on there, the money that we got in 23-24 came from those 3 years. The 30,900 yellow, the 28,750, and the 28,194. That's what our revenue was derived from in 23-24. So as you advance forward, the 3-year average is what the state pays us on. The very next year, 24-25, we lost the call out. We lost the red bubble. And that drop from 30,900 to 28,750 is staggering. That's millions and millions and millions of dollars. And again, we're not unique in this situation. If there's a district in the state of California that's in declining enrollment, the exact same thing happened to them. And more than likely, they're in the headlines right now talking about what they're doing with their budget too. But I needed to call this out because it's incredibly important to remember one of the drivers of the situation we're in is because of declining enrollment. And the situation will continue as long as we are still in declining enrollment. Now, we might be able to do some things to stave it off, to make it a little bit better, to get the ADA rate up. Yes, all of those things are definitely factors we will continue to look at and analyze. But the drop from the call out bubble down to where it is now is one of the single biggest things affecting our revenue stream. And I just wanted to call that out because it's in our MYP going forward that we're not going to have that high number as part of the calculation. So it's worth talking about. Okay, so given that, here are our enrollment assumptions for the current year and the next 2 years. 28.6 dropping down to 27.5. We are anticipating continued decline in enrollment. Our projected ADA, a certain percentage of that, we're holding 95.5%, so that just drives the second row there. Our UPP, which is our unduplicated pupil percentage, so the number of students that qualify for supplemental dollars from the local control funding formula, we are expecting to increase. And you can see there that it's going to probably be above 11% next year and closer to 12% a couple years from now. As Superintendent Kamick mentioned earlier, the COLA that's on the dartboard right now for next year is a 2.93 COLA. All the economic data is saying that that's probably not going to come to pass. It's worth mentioning at this moment that the COLA isn't a decision someone gets to make. The LCFF COLA is just a function of 8 different data points It's basically they're looking at inflation for governments, and they take 8 quarters of data and they get a calculation. That's not a decision, it's just math. Where the decision comes in is when the state builds their budget, which we'll talk about in a couple slides from now. The state gets to decide if they have enough tax revenue to fund the COLA at whatever the calculation comes out to. So at this point, 2.9 is probably going to be too high. It's probably not going to come in at that. They have 6 of the 8 data points they need to calculate the COLA. And right now it's trending closer to 2%. So it might end up at 2.2 or 2.3. We'll just have to wait and see. And we'll also see what the governor uses as part of his calculations, because in a month, in January, he's going to release his budget. We'll talk about that in a minute. So I've highlighted it in green on here because I wanted to call out the fact that Evan and his team have continued to use 2.93 in our calculations. We don't have definitive answer about which direction it's going. We're hearing some whisperings and some rumors. We'll wait until it changes, but 2.93% is baked into this MYP and into the first interim report, and it's worth mentioning that it may end up coming lower. The difference between 2.93 and where it comes in at 2.4 or 2.5 is about $1.7 million for us. So is that going to break the bank? No, maybe, but it's not great. It doesn't help us, but it's not going to be devastating. So just to give you an idea of the scale of a couple of tenths of a percentage point on the COLA. Other assumptions on the screen: STRS is a flat rate at 19.10. PERS, we already know it's going to be going up a couple of percentage points here and there. Those are on the screen. We're assuming 1% for step and column for both classified and certificated. That pretty much holds true each of the years, and we've continued to use that assumption. So with those assumptions, this is what the numbers look like. In the current year, we are projected to have revenues of $453 million and change there. We are projected to spend 488. That means we will be dipping into our ending fund balance to the tune of $34,887,000 and change. We will be overspending by that much. And this is a combined unrestricted and restricted together, just to make sure everyone knows. Next year, 25-26, we're showing that our revenue will go down a little bit, mainly because of the declining enrollment. 450 million. We'll spend 463. And I'm going to pause for just a moment because I want to call out at the bottom. I highlighted it in blue as a call out. We've already been discussing at the board meetings prior to my time about an ongoing set of reductions. We don't know exactly what they're going to be, but for the purposes of the first interim calculation, we just have it in there as a blanket number. I believe the target was set before I returned, but the point is that the $24 million reduction is baked into first interim. So wherever it comes from, it needs to happen. This is what it does to the bottom line next year. And you can see that even with a $24 million reduction, we are still overspending by $12.8 million. We have a way to get through that. And in the third year, you can see that the revenue comes in $459 million. The $24 million reduction continues. Our expenditures are 462. We're overspending by 3 million. The reason why this part's important is on the next slide. This is our ending fund balance. So normally, if you could see the whole page together, the last 2 slides are a continuance. It's the same accounting sheet, right? So you have your revenue, you got your expenditures. What are you left with? If you overspend, this slide is where it comes out of. And this is the part that I want to try to focus on for just a second. You can see that in 24-25, we started this year, our beginning fund balance, the money, quote unquote, left over, the stuff we hadn't budgeted yet to spend, was $56 million. We're projected to overspend by 34.8 million this year. That's going to leave our ending fund balance at 21.6 million. If you go to the section right below, the blue in the middle of the slide, these are the different things that make up that $21.6 million. Please note that 20.8 of it is legally restricted. We don't have full flexibility over those dollars. They're earmarked for specific things and we can only spend it on those things. That means that if all of these things hold true, all these assumptions and hold true through the end of the year, we're going to have an unrestricted ending fund balance of $187,000 in our Fund 1. That is no flexibility to handle or shoulder any problems that come because the majority of the money is restricted. So we end this year with 21.6. What does that do? Go to the middle column. Next year, we're projected to overspend by 12 million. That leaves us with 8 million. Notice the center section in blue, legally restricted 7.3. So we have a little bit more unrestricted dollars, close to 800,000. That's better. But that's still it's a very far cry from historical norms in San Ramon Valley. We're used to being in the millions of unrestricted dollars to be able to cushion unexpected things from the economy, from the state, for all the different things that have happened over the course of all of our memories of here in San Ramon Valley. The third year, we start ending fund balance with 8.7. We overspend by 3 million. We're down to 5.7. Again, restricted 5 million and 85,000 in assigned, unrestricted assigned. One other thing to note is people will say, well, hey, you have a reserve. What about the reserve? Well, that's at the bottom of the slide, Fund 17. And for those of you watching for the first time, the Reserve for Economic Uncertainty, the REU, is one of those things we have to set aside. It's 3% of our expenditures, and you can't really use it for anything. It only really covers half of one of our month's payroll anyway. And by the next interim report, we would have to put that money back. And you can see on the screen, we have $187,000. If we were to tap into the 14.6 million, how do we put it back by March? We wouldn't. We don't have the money. So besides the 14.6 in Fund 17, we have this other assigned amount. It's called declining enrollment. It's been there for several years because we knew declining enrollment was coming. I would like to point out that in the third year, we are tapping into that money to help balance this sheet. We have not balanced the books. We are still overspending, but we need to withdraw the declining enrollment from Fund 17, and we make that contribution to our general fund in the third year to make these numbers work. So the reserve percentage goes from 3.7, goes up a little bit in the second year to 4%, and then back down to 3.1%. Our minimum reserves is 3%. We're at the minimum. So the self-certification, I mentioned this earlier. This is one of the things that it's the task of the board and staff to make the recommendation and the board to vote. Over the 3-year fiscal period of the MYP, there's 3 different types of certification. A positive certification, that means the district can complete the fiscal period, the 3-year period, with a positive fund, cash, and reserve balance, and the district is financially solvent. A qualified certification means the district may not complete the fiscal period with a positive fund, cash, and reserve balance, and financial indicators require scrutiny and modest intervention from the county. That intervention comes from the county. A negative certification means the district will not complete the fiscal period with a positive fund, cash, or reserve balance, and aggressive intervention is required. So based on the current multi-year projection, based on the assumptions that we've shown you tonight, and all of the good stuff that's buried in all these pages here as part of the report, staff recommends that the board adopt a positive certification for the 24-25 first interim, because we have that line in there of the ongoing $24 million in reductions next year. And in the third year, we can certify positive. We meet the minimum amounts. Without those reductions, we would not be able to suggest a positive certification. So those 2 things are connected at this point in time. So Superintendent Kamick already mentioned this a little bit. The Legislative Analyst's Office, their budget outlook for 25-26, specifically the California labor market and consumer spending continues to be weaker than forecasted. This is the soft part of the economy that he was referring to. The stock market continues to climb. That does help capital gains taxes if people sell their investments and such. And it's worth remembering that 50% of our state's personal income tax comes from capital gains. It comes from the wealthiest 1% of folks in the state of California. So when the stock market does well, the economy tends to do better. Our tax revenues go up, and mostly the state can afford the things that they want. I think the concern that I read in the LAO's report is that labor market and consumer spending is a little weaker than they were thinking. That may clear the way for the Federal Reserve to cut an interest rate. We'll just see how that all unfolds over the next several months. We have a new administration coming in at the federal level. So there's going to be some things happening, and we'll see how that affects the governor's proposal. The COLA uncertainty, I already mentioned that. It's going to probably be closer to 2.4, maybe 2.2. Locally, we had our community come out and strongly support the renewal of Measure Q, the parcel tax, and that's now extended through June of 2034. That helps immensely by stabilizing our local revenue source. In terms of the scheme of how that factors in, Measure Q garners about $6.9 million in revenue each year. So if it hadn't passed, that 24 million target could have been much higher, would have been much higher. So the support is welcome, but it doesn't solve our problem. We still have to take some action here. We will forecast and continue to see continued pressure from rising costs for personnel, healthcare, goods and services, contracting things out. Those are all very expensive. One-time revenues and carryover will be exhausted by 25-26. Programs and positions supported by one-time dollars are running out of funds this year and next. So future considerations for SRV, we still have declining enrollment, as you saw in the assumptions. The last 4 years, we've had an average drop of 1.6% or about 500 kids each year. The trend is projected to continue. We don't see that stopping. The SRV reserves are nearly exhausted. As I mentioned earlier, the state required reserves must be 3% for a district our size, and we're projecting 3.7, 4, and then 3.1. The budget reduction target of 24 million is required to meet the 3% reserve requirement. To balance the budget, additional reductions would be necessary, or new revenues to be identified, one of the two, or both. Both would be great. So in summary, revenues are projected to continue to decline because kids are declining. Our costs are continuing to increase. The state's fiscal outlook is mixed, with no new funding sources available at this time that we're aware of. And as a matter of fact, the LAO's recommendation to the legislature was, you're probably not going to be able to afford any new programs. You might be able to do like a one-time thing, but ongoing programs, you're probably not going to have the money to support that. That was one of their conclusions at this point in time. Back to local, SRVUSD's reserves are at the minimum amount and at historic lows. Unrestricted dollars are already spent. Restricted dollars are earmarked over the next 2 years and will also be spent in the next 2 years. You see in the third year, it goes all the way down to $5 million. SRVUSD does not have the reserves to withstand a surprise expenditure or tackle an unforeseen problem. We just don't have it at this time, and we don't foresee having it in the next near future. Without new ongoing revenues and or additional future cuts to expenditures, SRVUSD will continue to remain in the current fiscal imbalance that we have. So all of that said, I think you know this, but it's one of the things that I would be remiss if I did not express my extreme caution to the board and the district about our fiscal position. This is the reality that we are sitting in. The only thing that moves the needle drastically is going to be ongoing new revenues from somewhere. And you can see the numbers, how big they would have to be. A parcel tax isn't going to do that all by itself. So this isn't necessarily something we can solve locally, at least in the near term. It's two sides of the coin. It's revenues and expenditures. And unless revenues can go up, the expenditures have got to go down. And so this was a difficult report to put together, not the financial part of it. Evan and his team did the lion's share of that before I returned to the district. But I think synthesizing those numbers into this presentation was difficult. Superintendent and I conferred on this quite a bit and wanted to make sure that I was able to be as clear as possible as I could with the board and the community about the fiscal position. I know that it has been a trying few months, both prior to my return, had nothing to do with my return, but I know it's been a tough school year so far. And I think it's important to be as upfront and transparent about this because it is the reality. So at this point, I will turn it back to board president, superintendent, and the board for any questions, comments. Thank you.
We have 2 public comments. Do we want to ask questions and then take comment and then
So we take a couple of questions?
from us? Yes,
Yeah.
yeah, absolutely.
May I go?
Yes, please.
So, Danny, am I understanding the dynamics of the numbers such that we got to the 24 million target because it's really the bare minimum that can get us to having a positive certification based on these MYPs? Because I was surprised to see that after making 24 million in cuts, we're still 12 million upside down. So if we were, not that we want to make more cuts, but if we were to go deeper than that, we would definitely be on better footing as we go forward and potentially be able to rebuild along the ideas of more knowledge about more revenue, but doing it in the order of where you're not spending money before you have it.
In short, yes. I think the bottom line is that if this was just a fiscal exercise, which it clearly is not, right? There's so many other variables and ramifications that have to be taken into consideration. But if this is just a fiscal exercise, that would be my recommendation, because it is the safer course of action. It's harder now, but it's the safer course of action because it provides flexibility. It provides the board decision-making space and room. So if that was the board's pleasure and you're asking my opinion, that would be something definitely to consider. The degree to which the balance beam of how far do you go and how much flexibility and how much comfort, that's now the question, right? But to your original question, 24 million was the target that was identified because it made us meet the minimum. It got us by.
But those last 2 years are
Still,
pretty like on a tightrope.
still difficult, yes.
And can I ask to that point, that's assuming that 24 million is ongoing cuts, not, because I saw you had the same 24 million.
Correct. The assumption in the MYP is that it is $24 million of ongoing cuts.
And if I can just add on to that, because I think, some of this conversation, I think builds to and leads to some of the work that we discussed in the Budget Advisory Committee meeting in terms of our finances, and will build towards the recommendation plan that I put forward for the board's consideration at the December 19th meeting. And so I think in terms of your question, when we look at ongoing versus one time, as you can imagine, in my budget reduction recommendations, we will have both ongoing and one time. When we look at one time, it's a label that we give it because we're considering a one-time reduction as temporary. But when we look at it in terms of the budget cycle, where we are mandated to report to the county office 2 interim reports a year, and we have to self-certify where we fall in those 3 years, we're looking at those one-time reductions being one time each year for the 3-year budget cycle. Right. And there's a lot of that appropriate under the law and through good partnership has to happen at the collective bargaining table. But it's just important to note that when we look at budget reductions in the future and we see a one-time reduction, we really are looking at building that one-time reduction into each year of the 3-year budget cycle. And if things change, then obviously we take the board's direction, meet with our labor partners, and maybe some of those things change.
And unless things got better, it's the 4th year and the 5th year and the 6th year or other cuts, because the problem doesn't go away.
Yeah, I just think it's important to categorize that, and we'll talk more about it at the next meeting. But when we say one time, it's really not just a 1-year reduction. It's a temporary reduction for the 3-year budget cycle.
Right.
Danny, thank you so much I think you did a really good job spelling this out. And I think anybody who takes the time to watch this from the community is going to understand that even though we've been discussing this for a while, it's now starting to crystallize. And we're starting to see exactly the financial situation that we're coming in, as well as the origins of it, of the enrollment and ADA and things that were done to help during COVID. And now kind of having to reset the table for some of those things as well, too. I mean, just thinking of it in an analogy, as we're talking about this $24 million reduction, it's almost like if you're, managing your budget at your house, you're thinking of all the things you have to cut just so you can keep paying your mortgage. But if the water heater breaks, then you're screwed. And that's kind of a little bit of what I heard from you is it's like we're keeping our fingers crossed and praying that nothing else falls off. And yet we have some of these other indicators that are out there. You're talking about soft, from soft recovery. We're talking about COLA and uncertainties with that. So I think if anybody's watching, if anybody's, following all of this, as I know many people in the community are doing, this is the serious situation that we're in, and we're doing our best to kind of understand all of these ramifications and also understand what we're trying to do to support our students and our teachers and our staff and make the right decisions through it. But it's bleak. Is that the right word? It's not pretty. And Superintendent Kamek has said that numerous times that in doing the best to not have this affect students, there's just such a big number where there will be some effect to students, but how do we minimize that effect? And I think that we're going to talk about more of that when you talk about budget numbers. But are there any other liabilities or risks that you've identified or thinking about that might not even be captured in this first interim report as you're looking out?
I mean, none that we are aware of. If we were aware of it, it would be in there.
Okay.
I think at this point, there's some unknowns. We know it's going to occur generally, but we don't know what the exact number will be. We have an assumption for as an example, for health and welfare benefits. I think we have a 10% assumption that the rates will go up by 10%. That may be higher than that. We're going to find out here in the next couple of months. That's one of those variables you never really know until they hit you with the renewal. That's one item. I think another item would be, additional special ed costs that we can't foresee. Sometimes we serve the students who come to us, and sometimes we'll have a student who comes in and their needs are exceptional, and we just have to adjust, and we do it. And so those are the kinds of things you do in this line of work. We can't predict it, but we can try to anticipate it and put in good controls and have budgets where we need them. And then if we get through a portion of the year and we don't need the budget, we'll repurpose it for something else. The budget should shift, it should move, it should adjust to conditions on the ground. You don't want a budget that's stagnant and stays the same all year long. That means it's a living thing, it should move. So I think everything that we can think of that we know of is in this report. And the good news is we're going to get another chance to update it again. And we'll come back to you in March and show you the activity through January. And we'll have new assumptions at the time, or updated assumptions based upon perhaps new economic data. The governor's budget is going to be released in January. And so we'll get an idea of what he's thinking and what he thinks he can get done with the legislature. So we're entering that time of year where the variables change a little bit from each of the times we talk to you. And so anything new we get, we'll bring it back. We'll put it into the calculator, and we'll spit out a new report, and we'll tell you what we're seeing.
Yeah. I have another question, but Shelley,
No,
you
go
go.
ahead.
Okay. I was just curious, what programs and positions are we currently funding with one-time dollars that are going away?
Quite a few things. So we have, well, let's see, a lot of that is your world, Ms. Wardo, and Evan may have it more readily. I can see he's finding a file right now, but we have, as an example, this year alone, to remember, we did the $3.5 million for this current year. We're paying for some administrators out of one-time funds to get through this year, as an example. So that's educator effectiveness grant. We have a lot of professional development that's coming out of that. We have some counselors that are being paid out of
Elementary counselors.
Elementary counselors are being paid out of the I just blanked on the name of it, but it's the
COVID dollars.
thank you. Not expanded learning opportunities, the other one. What's it called?
Learning Recovery Emergency Block Grant.
That one, Learning Recovery Emergency Block Grant. So again, the alphabet soup of all the different things.
Yeah.
So those positions are paid out of that. We have some of the PD, but also some of the hourly stipends or the hourly timesheets that we'll pay to staff to do certain things for us are being paid out of one-time funds. So there's a lot of that stuff we could generate a list. We do have it. I just can't remember all the details off the top of my head.
Thank you.
Yeah, and maybe for when we're in the workshop, maybe like having that list, I think might be helpful for us if there isn't something here.
So I heard you say, and I'm sure that it's true, that it would be safer to make deeper cuts. It's just with the volatility of the state, we go from 1 year of having all this money to the next year being in a huge deficit. I hesitate to do that only because if we do those things and it means people then those people are going to be gone. And if things change as they do sometimes on a dime, it's going to be hard to be able to get that back. And so I'm just torn about that because I feel like this is such a big number. It's a lot at one time right now. And I don't know, maybe I'm an optimist. I have faith that maybe the state and the way that technology is progressing, it's actually supporting a lot of the state's revenues right now. And I work in that industry, and so I'm hoping that we're going to be able to carry a lot of that and that the rest of the economy will catch up. I just hate to make such deep cuts like those in this first time around. And you did an amazing job, as always, of explaining everything so that everyone can understand exactly why we find ourselves here. And it's sort of the perfect storm of many things all at the same time.
Travis, do you have any questions, or Susanna, any questions before we take public comment?
Yeah, I actually do have one question. I'm a little bit curious. I know that you brought up that our reserves are at historic lows for our school district. I'm curious. I don't know if you have the data for the past couple years, but how exactly did we get ourselves into this situation, and how might we be avoiding that in the future? Because I think having a robust reserve account is really important, so that, as you said, right, like if something goes wrong, we need to be able to adapt. And it would have been nice if we had higher reserves, especially for the situation we're in now.
I would say that to the first part of, where were they before the reserve amounts? I would say that historically, from my memory, I go back, I think can see the spreadsheet that I have. I just won't take the time right now to find it. I think we were probably hovering anywhere from 7, 8, 9%. That's probably more historical, and Trustee Hurd's been here and may remember that as well. And I'm looking at Evan, and maybe that's the number, but I can get that sheet out and we can update it and share it with the board. As far as how we got here, as I mentioned early in the presentation, one of the main drivers is the decline in enrollment. When we had those 2,000 students come off of our rolls on the 3-year average and we lost that's huge. The other thing is that it coincided, to your point, Trustee Clark, about the perfect storm. It's coinciding with an expansion of services since COVID. And some of that was incredibly intentional because we received grants from the state to do just that. We had a grant to hire paraeducators. That's what we were supposed to do with the money, and we did. So we've increased our staffing because that's what our students needed. That's what our staff needed. And so those were done very intentionally, with full knowledge. We also knew at the time, because I was here, I remember doing it, where we talked about adding certain services with knowledge that the money was going to eventually run out unless new money became available, because we were funding it with one-time things. So we had several grants. I think, if I remember correctly, the Learning Recovery Block Grant and the discretionary Arts and Music Instructional Materials discretionary block grant were $22 million a piece. That's $40 million. And we made a plan to spend those, one was restricted, one was more unrestricted. And we made a plan to spend those over several years to find the things that our students needed at the time coming back from being at home. And so that's why we expanded counseling services. That's why we expanded a bunch of other things that they needed. So we're at that perfect storm where our enrollment decline continues. So that's dropping our revenue. We have these expenses in programs and people on the books that made things great for our students and our staff. And unfortunately, we don't have the ongoing revenue now to continue to support those things. So it's kind of those two things coming together. And just like every other school district, and frankly, every person in, at least everyone I know, expenses for almost everything have gone up tremendously over the last 4 or 5 years. So everything we do is more expensive. We could do the exact same thing we were doing in 2018. It's going to cost more now this year. Even if we didn't do anything new, just do the same thing. So when you add those different variables up, you find yourself in the situation that we're in right now.
And Danny, if I can add, there's one more thing, because before the pandemic, right before the pandemic, we settled with our Servia partners in good faith, because we were sitting on lots of reserves and they were saying, we need these things for our kids. Let's all work together to lean into these reserves and say okay to these things, with the mutual understanding that we would, as a community, do something about it, whether it was pass another parcel tax layer or passed a state initiative, which folks worked on. But we went into COVID deficit spending, no, full well planning it. But then with that big infusion of money, it kind of hit it all. But then when you add some very strong COLAs and therefore some very nice raises, that makes that structural deficit even bigger. So we've had some right sizing to do for a while. It's just, why would you do that while you're sitting on all this one-time money that you're supposed to be spending to help your kids recover from COVID, the COVID, learning gap. So it's, like Shelley said, perfect storm, but I don't want people to forget that we went into 2020 deficit spending.
It was the same week. It was Sunday or Laura,
We
was it
just settled
Sunday or a
on
Monday?
wee hours
And
of
then
Tuesday
Friday, we
morning.
closed down.
Yeah.
That's right, and closed down on Friday because that's when the stay-at-home order.
And I don't remember how
Same
big
week.
we called it the bridge. Laura, do you remember? Was it around $3 million?
Yes.
3.2.
And then you add inflation on those numbers
right.
and yeah.
So
So I have a question, and I know, right, one of the big issues is declining enrollment.
Mhm.
And thank you, Danny and Evan, for reminding me that about the hold harmless, right? Because we were, because it did kind of propped us up a couple of years, and kind of mask our declining enrollment. So the average is still, we're looking at 500 per year.
about that.
About that.
Yes.
Okay, even with some of the, like Ferry Preserve, some of the housing that's come in, it's still.
We've sent our information off to the demographer that we use for our annual update, and so they're crunching those numbers now. So the increase in enrollment from those new housing developments that haven't come online yet are slated to hit the books in several years away from now. And so in the meantime, we're still overall going to be declining, but in certain pockets in the district, they will be getting bigger because they'll have more homes in their attendance boundary. So that's a different challenge that we're going to have to try to address. But overall, we have certain neighborhoods that are they're maturing, and the kids have moved through our system, and the families are staying. They're not leaving. So that turnover rate of homes is decreasing. The other major factor that's 20 plus years in the making is, and Superintendent Kamix talked about this, and they've flagged this a long time ago at all of the state agencies, the Center for Economic Policy and CASBO and all the different, and CSBA, everyone has identified the birth rate in California has just, it has been trending lower and lower for 20, 25 years. That's not new. It's finally hitting us, and it got kind of a shock to the system with what happened during the pandemic. And so almost all school districts, public school districts, saw a drop off after the pandemic. If things were declining, it kind of dropped. And then now some districts are seeing some stabilization, and they're leveling out a little bit, but they're still declining. If they were declining before, they're still declining. We have a couple of growing districts around us, but not very many. Dublin happens to be one, but they're starting to taper off now too. So, it's an interesting situation because increasing enrollment benefited the district the last time we saw an economic downturn, 2008, the Great Recession. Around that time, San Ramon Valley was able to weather that storm primarily because of two things. One, we were getting bigger because of all the homes in Doherty Valley. And two, we had a large fund balance and were able to get through that year, even though the state had to make mid-year cuts. So that's one of those things where that we benefited last time. And this time around, having the decline in enrollment and just being smaller, it just has a different effect this time.
And you don't see, or when will we know what the impact of the new housing will be overall for the district? I know you mentioned that, some areas are going to have a more of a declining enrollment than what we're expecting. Is that what you're saying? And then other areas, we know where there's building will have an increase, and so it'll even out and shake out to that 500 each year? Or do we just not know yet, and we're making the assumption of 500, and maybe it'll only be 300, or maybe it'll be 700?
Yeah, yes, and so for the next 3 years, we're still projecting the decline of 500 each of the next 3 years. I'm interested to see how the demographer takes the housing data and incorporates that into their projection. I'm interested in seeing it because this is the first time in my years in San Ramon that we've had this huge influx of housing since Doherty Valley. So I'm interested to see how it goes. It's a totally different type of housing than what Doherty Valley saw. And so the student generation rate from those homes is going to be slightly different. Also, trends are just different now.
Right.
And that we do have families, multiple kids moving into condos and apartments. Like they're okay with that. So those variables will come and I'll be able to give you a better answer once I see the report and we'll be able to analyze it in cabinet. At this point, I have an idea of where the trends are going, but I don't think we're going to see a huge drop off in certain areas and a huge gain in other areas, but we'll still overall be declining. I think that the decline is still modest in the places that it's already occurring. We've got that city center area that's going to feed certain schools. They're going to see more students. The numbers, I'll be able to tell you probably in a couple of months.
I have one other question, then we'll go to public comment. So can you talk a little bit about what we might expect? So with the federal funding, so we know that there's a change in administration and, you know, we don't know what's going to happen, but would any shift in federal funding, would that dramatically affect what we're looking at in terms of the next 3 years, our projections?
More than likely not. And it's because San Ramon Valley doesn't get a lot of our revenue from the federal government to begin with. I think we're at 2 or 3%, something like that. And so we don't anticipate that changing at this point. We've held that steady. We're not projecting a decline or a huge jump or anything like that. It really is going to depend upon what the president-elect decides to do in his administration, and we'll just wait and see. I think that for San Ramon Valley, whatever those decisions are, they might affect our neighbors more drastically than they would affect us. So it's not a huge variable for us to be super concerned about. We will certainly watch it and make adjustments as we find out things though.
And it's the federal funds are by and large restricted funds.
They are
Yeah.
all restricted funds. Yes, that is true.
We'll take public comment. So first we have Mike Arata, and after Mike Arata, we have Bob Allen.
Pass around copies of the sign, a little bit more comprehensive than the sign because I had additional information after the print. I think I've got 10 copies. 7 people. The quick synopsis of some of your revenue and expenditure statements. It's drawn from both your budget in June and now the first interim. In your budget discussions tonight, some numbers jump out. As reported, you show a revenue increase of $11.5 million, but a projected spending increase, meanwhile, of more than $22 million. Adjusted for both inflation and a 3,500 student enrollment drop since 2015, that would put you nearly $160 million ahead of that year's spending. Again, adjusted for both inflation and enrollment. So some observations and questions. I'm not clear yet why you show a $3.5 million increase in certificated salary costs just since your June estimate. You show 92 fewer students now than in June. Number two, again, comparing to 2015, when you had 3,500 more students than you do now, you report in your fuller budget 2,746 full-time equivalent employees now versus 2,483 FTEs back then, an increase of 263 FTEs since 2015, again, despite 3,500 fewer students now. Three, most of your $22 million anticipated expenditure increase now versus your June projections is found in an $8 million increase in books and supplies and a $14.4 million increase in services. Since this has been explained now as unspent money from last year, this amount seems to be an obvious target for your budget reductions. Four, of the total $61.6 million services first interim budget, $27 million is for consulting and related operational costs, likely including substitutes when your teachers are pulled from the classroom for the latest equity gimmicks and gaslighting or other non-academic exercises. Number five, another $17 million is for service sub-agreements, or in other words, contracting out. Despite your 263 number FTE increase since 2015, again, when you had 3,500 fewer students. 6, one wonders how much of your budget now is devoted to failing equity programs and personnel, how much to other non-academic pursuits. What is certain is that SRVUSD is busy replicating what other school districts across the country have done, i.e. increased tax dollar expenditures several multiples of inflation and enrollment rates over time, while measures of academic achievement continue to decline. Number 7, and finally, you and others fulfilled the NEA's own enthusiastic prophecy of 1969 when I began teaching. Quote, the schools are becoming clinics whose purpose is to provide an individualized psychosocial treatment for the student. Or as Senator Sam Hayakawa added in 1978, an educational heresy has flourished, a heresy that rejects the idea of education as the acquisition of knowledge and skills, instead substitutes education as therapy.
Thank you, Mr. Arata. Next up is Bob Allen.
I'd like to thank Superintendent Kamick and Mr. Hillman and their staff for the first interim report, thus beginning another exciting cycle of school funding. Funding for most schools in California is provided by the state, as we all know. This, of course, is due to Prop 13, which took the power to fund districts away from the local agencies and deposited it in Sacramento. Over the years, it's been tweaked with Prop 98 and with the local control funding formula. I want to acknowledge our community that supports our schools through ed funds and donations. They're very generous and we as teachers appreciate it. However, we cannot solve this current problem with a bake sale, if I may. Since most of the power of the purse is in Sacramento, we as educators will be using our voices in Sacramento to encourage changes to funding formulas. We urge board members and district staff to join us to lobby our state legislatures to keep tweaking the funding to get the best for our students. One suggestion to make is to allow districts to choose census funding or to have a choice of census funding or average daily attendance for calculating budgets for the districts. While changing funding formulas will never happen quickly, and it's only one of the many ways we could help fund the best for our students, I encourage you to head to Sacramento, work with our local legislators, work with your educators, and advocate for your students. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Allen. Right. Does anyone else have any comments or further questions or?
I think just kind of following what Mr. Allen had said, right? There had been some talk about enrollment versus ADA funding. But as we saw today at the lunch and learn with CSB or whatever, the state is just, okay with maybe looking at, right, studying like what that would mean and stuff.
A bill passed, which is taking action on looking at how they would do it.
Though, but not.
Well, yeah, because you got to look at what the ramifications are, because last thing our little underfunded LCFF district would want to do is actually come out less than we are with ADA, because our ADA is relatively strong. If Prop 98 governs how big the pie is, you're really just talking about how to distribute it, but they might come up with clever ways of, because I think we all agree enrollment would be better for planning, but the devil's in the details, and we don't want to be in the short end of the stick of how the state does this.
Danny, from like an advisory standpoint, I'm not comfortable with this multi-year projection ending up at 3.13 reserves. What sort of, I know that we're doing this for a positive certification of this, but that makes me really nervous about other things that are going to happen. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but it seems like there would be advice back to not be that close to razor thin margins. Sorry, I'm putting you on spot.
No, it's okay. I think it's part of the thing, part of the gig. I think I'll try to answer your query like this. having the reserve amount be as low as it is keeps me up at night. This is the thing that makes me nervous. Because there's only so many options we have to pay for the water here, to use your analogy. And so we don't have credit cards. We don't have home loans. Like there's some other things we can do, but we're pretty limited in what we can do. So that I can tell you what it does for me sitting in this position. Beyond that, I think that is if you're not asking a leading question, but if I'm to go to the next logical place of what you're in discussing, I think I would need some time to talk to our superintendent and our executive team to talk about what other things are possible to try to make the reserve a little more healthy in those out years.
Yeah.
And so I would want to take some time to give you a thoughtful answer, but I think I can answer the sentiment of your question by saying that this does make me nervous. It's not a settling feeling. So
Thank you.
I don't know if that's
It answered it
helpful.
exactly without, having to go into too much detail. So I appreciate that.
And if I may, I think where I look at that, Trustee Van Z, is where are our reserve levels? It makes me remarkably nervous. Ideally, I would like to see us have, and this may not be wildly popular, and I accept that. I'd like to see us have kind of a tiered approach to the reserve, where the first year is a little bit larger, the second year smaller, and the third year is smaller than that, right? So the third year getting closer to 3, 4 makes me less nervous because we have more time to adjust. I also recognize that there's an obligation to spend today's dollars on today's students and our staff.
Yeah.
And we don't want to be stockpiling reserves. I believe there are mechanisms that can be enacted through courageous collaboration with labor partners and with the board about how we handle closing the books in a year-end balance so that we're not stacking money for any ulterior motive. We want to give it to our hardworking employees. We want to allocate it to support programs that students need and deserve. But I think as we heard earlier tonight, and I want to acknowledge and appreciate our SRVUSD President Laura Finko's comments that she made in the beginning of the meeting. When our reserves are that narrow, it puts us in a very precarious position. And I agree with Laura's comments that budgets are truly a projection. They come into sharper focus with each interim report, right? So we've got data for the first part of this year that crystallizes it a little bit more. Second interim, we'll have much more of the fiscal data for the year. It's not absolute and factual until we get to unaudited actuals. We close the book and we know for certain, what did we spend and what did we get? So it is a projection throughout the whole process. However, we have to live within that world of projections because we're required under the Ed Code to present a first and second interim. We're required to self-certify those. And how we self-certify those based on our projections determines whether or not we're positive, qualified, or negative. And Danny described earlier what level of intervention happens from the county office. And the county superintendent has to notify the state superintendent and the controller's office when a district puts forward certain budgets that are negative or qualified. While I acknowledge it lives within the world of projection, it also carries with it concrete actions and consequences within those years that you project. And having the reserves that are so thin makes it, in my opinion, very challenging. I think when we look at how do we increase revenue in the district? Well, grateful to our community for the passage of Measure Q. But in a prior district, we looked at trying to increase rental fees for our facilities. Maybe we went up a little bit too high because we had a number of huge clients that were regular renters of facilities go somewhere else. And that's a gamble we can't afford if our reserves are razor thin. We want to raise the ADA because that's significant more funding for the district. But misprojecting your ADA upward in a budget is like anticipating an increase in enrollment that doesn't come. It's very dangerous in a healthy budget. It's precarious, even worse when you have razor thin margins, right? Because if we project a higher ADA in the budget and it doesn't go up that 1.5 or 2% we want, we've misrepresented our revenues significantly. So I really think we should be looking at a higher reserve, but there's a balance there. And I don't think it should come at the expense of programs to students, but I think there's a healthier margin between being in a razor thin position where we only have a couple $100,000 in a $480 million budget to deal with unexpected outcomes. Now, I acknowledge the sheet says we have more than that, but if 20 million of it is restricted, then we're dipping into the reserves.
Can you go in a little bit more detail of the consequences if we do go into qualify or negative certification?
Yeah, I'll ask Danny to dig in a little bit more, but I mean, my review is qualified. That means we don't meet it in one of the 3 years. Negative is we don't meet it in the current or the next fiscal year. And so the county superintendent notifies the state superintendent. The county superintendent also notifies the controller. And then what you start to get into is different levels of intervention. And Danny can probably describe better when they happen, but we can have things where the county office can impose revisions to our budget. And I don't mean this as a scare tactic, but these are practical realities. They can stay and rescind actions if they think it's inconsistent with revisions. And we could get a fiscal advisor, right? And there's a lot, and it doesn't mean that all those will happen, but those are all potentials, and those would be the more aggressive terms, probably in the negative certification, not the qualified certification. Does that sound about right, Danny?
Yes, I would agree with that. I think that the one thing to remember, we don't talk about it at this forum a lot, but we have the budget, which is the projection and the assumptions and everything. And then we have the accounting, which is real. That's the money we receive. That's the money that we pay out. And so those two things, I won't bore you with it, but the general ledger and the cash that we have on hand sitting at the county, earning interest if it's sitting there, and the money that we pay each month to employees and for services and all those things, that's our cash. If we run out of cash, the state's coming. That's some of the headlines you've seen from other districts over the last 20 years, right? That when they run out of cash, that's when FCMAT comes in, the Fiscal Crisis Management Assistance Team. That's probably a negative certification, probably precedes that. That's the very high level intervention. That's what's happening to our neighbor across the bay right now, is that they've been in that situation for a while. The decision-making process is not here. The people sitting in these seats are elected by local community, but the decisions are made by someone appointed by the state to come in and run things. So that's the most extreme level of intervention. Prior to running out of cash, we would probably be in a qualified status, like you said. A more less egregious sort of intervention occurred with one of our other neighbors in the county this last year. And it came down to their budget was fine. They had cash and everything, but they didn't have their LCAP figured out. And because their LCAP wasn't approved at the same time as the budget in the correct order, the county actually stepped in at that point and said, okay, we're going to have to run your financials until you guys get your LCAP fixed. It didn't last very long. It was, I don't know how long it was, but that's the kind of intervention that the county will then come in and do if you're in a qualified status. I can get you a more detailed list of kind of what's in the middle ground of the type of steps, but it's going to be dependent upon the conditions on the ground. So it's hard for me to give you an exact answer because I would have to make up a scenario and assume some things. So what I'd love to do is just avoid that and not have a scenario at all, and we'll just avoid qualified status. But the qualified status is, you're not going to meet the minimum requirement within one of the 3 years. Typically, it's the 2 out years. And a district can state that they're qualified, and then the very next make changes, and then the very next interim, the next reporting period be positive again. A qualified status is not the be all end all. That's, oh my gosh, we're going to now run off the cliff or anything. It's not. It doesn't mean that it's a forever thing. It's a snapshot in time. And so I'll just give you an example. We could be in qualified status at second interim if the level of cuts that we make doesn't meet the minimum reserves. What we showed you today is a $24 million ongoing reduction for the 2 out years. But if we did 20 million, just as an example, we'd be in qualified status in March. We would come to you and say, we can't meet it in the 3rd year. So we're gonna have to make a recommendation that you certify us as qualified, and we'll take another 3 months and we'll come back to you in May and June, and we'll try to balance for the 3 years. And by the way, at the June time period, when the board is asked to adopt next year's budget, you don't get to self-certify. It's a pass-fail. You have to meet the 3 years. Otherwise, the county won't approve your budget. And that's when they would step in and start doing things with the district in the month of probably July, if we don't have a budget that meets the 3 years. So we have to take enough action that we're starting next school year and the 2 years after that in a positive status. So I can get the detail. I would like to maybe not get the detail and work on some of the other creative strategies on how we get the reserves up, but I'll look into it and see if I can give you some more concrete examples. I've got lots of colleagues who have been in this seat, have been a county superintendent or CBO, and have now worked for FCMAT. And so I can give them a call and ask a couple of questions.
Well, and it might also be, before you take that as a non-voted on action from the board, that maybe your answer was good enough.
Yeah.
Was for me.
And I just want to reiterate, when I was talking about making any projections or assumptions in increasing revenue, I'm not suggesting against that. I think we should explore all of those options. But I think timing and sequence is really what I'm talking about, whereas we should be focused on getting the ADA up. We should be focused on securing other sources of revenue. And when we do that, and those manifest themselves, then that's an opportunity to potentially undo, reverse, or restore something that may have been part of a budget reduction. But I am very guarded against not making the appropriate level of reduction with an anticipation of increased revenue, when that is one of the more challenging tactics for a school district to take outside of a parcel tax, is to manifest increased revenue.
One of the districts that I heard from in one of the workshops I was at CSBA, it was the superintendent of Napa Valley Unified speaking, and they've already been through this, they're like 2 years ahead of us. And she said, you just gotta buckle down and get through the ugly. And then you're on the other side and you can start to build it back. But to be hanging on in this precarious place is really not good for the environment. It's not good for the culture. It's not good for the labor relations. It's not good for the kids.
Can I ask a question about the services that or contracts that we have for services outside of the district? Have we had the time to be able to look at those or see if we could renegotiate? I know it's probably not a huge amount of money, but I know this all kind of happened quickly. We had I was on the budget committee with Trustee Van Zee, and we looked at a lot of things, but I mean, we have a lot of things that we pay for that are not internal. We have looked at those to see if we could renegotiate or change any of that to bring the expenses down.
Yes, we have. So in short, we have already taken some action where if we didn't think we needed something, we've already terminated that contract. If we are going to handle a service or provide something in a different way, we've already, if it can be a management decision and we can do it, we've already kind of implemented those things. That's some of the changes we made for the current budget year with the $3.5 million too.
Okay.
So we started to look at that, but I also want to say that it's an ongoing thing. It's not like a point in time where you do and say, okay, I don't have to do this again.
Right.
We should always be doing it. And so that's one of the things. I was gone for 2 years, and me coming back in, I haven't had a chance for myself to do it, but I know the team has done it. And I know that cabinet, before I returned, also looked at some things and made some decisions that we don't need to do that anymore. Stop paying for that. We'll call and cancel, 30-day cancellation, no problem. So in the places where that low-hanging fruit is available, we've taken advantage of that. On some of our other things, it might be a longer wind down. We might need the rest of this year, or it might be something we don't need next year. That's kind of the next level. And then beyond the level of that is in my mind, is a third pot, which would be, it's a service that we need, but can we find a different way of doing it or a cheaper way of doing it? And that might be a longer puzzle to solve. Again, this is going to be something that is not done in December or in January. This is going to be an ongoing process for me and the team, because we have to look at everything. It isn't just looking at revenue sources and finding new things. It's also looking at what's currently on the books to say, if we are going to redefine what we can afford, then that means everything has to be looked at.
Right.
So it's kind of 3 different buckets or 4 different buckets in my head, and we're looking at all of it.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I think that we know, just look at the math, there's cuts to be made. We only have so much money, we have to spend it on specific things, right? But I also would ask us to find that balance and to not overcompensate for the in the cuts with a fear of what might happen in the future. I mean, I know we need to make sure we have the reserve, but the impact of these budget cuts is going to be significant. And for us to, before we even start to ask ourselves, is it enough? Is it enough? Do we need to make more? Do we need to make more? I think we know what the number is today, and it's not perfect. None of this is perfect. All of this is going to be really, really hard. And I just want us to find that balance and make sure that we're also taking into consideration any impact of overcompensation that might have in terms of cuts that we have to make as we're having these conversations. So.
Yeah, it kind of leads to the other part of this agenda item, which is the resolution. And forgive me if I'm stepping too forward on it, but I think it connects well to what you were saying, Trustee Brad, is we have a resolution attached to this agenda item, which in essence is what the county wants to see from us, which is a commitment to say we're going to make at minimum these level of reductions because our budget at first interim shows that they're needed. Now, when we get to second interim, they would likely be anticipating a specific list of budget reductions that get to that target. The reason they look for these kind of resolutions is because there have been districts in the past in this county and other counties that put a line item in their budget that says, we're going to cut 20 million, right? Or 24 million, and they don't do it. And then that that district turns negative. The county has to come and intervene, and the county says, you said you were going to do it and you didn't. I fully believe this board will take the appropriate action to ensure our fiscal stability and engage in rich discussion about what that level of action is. But as you were describing, we can if we can, and Evan, Danny, please correct me, but we can build into the projections and out years further reductions as a line item in our budget, as long as they're not so massive, right? Like if the county sees a $40 million reduction in our budget, they're going to want to talk about, hey, what's going on? But if we put in the out years of the $4 or $5 million budget reduction, I would anticipate we could cooperate with the county to say we're projecting that in the out years without actually implementing it, if that makes sense, right? And so, projections have kind of a life both ways, and we have to look at those things. And then when we get close to the current year, well, or the next year, then the county's like, I need the list, I need the proof, I need the action.
Do we want to, this is an action item for consideration of acceptance of the first interim report and then adoption of the resolution.
I'll move to accept the first interim report.
I'll second.
The motion was made by Board Member Hurd and seconded by Board Member Van Zee. Roll call vote. Student Board Member Hodges?
Aye.
Board Member Hurd?
Aye.
Board Member Van Zee?
Aye.
Board Member Ordway?
Aye.
Board Member Clark?
Aye.
Board Member Brett?
Aye.
Motion passes 5-0.
All right, so now we're going to move on to 11.6, which we had moved from consent 13.8. And that's the consideration of approval of resolution number 56-2425, authorizing the participation in the zero emission school bus and infrastructure SSB incentive project. And I was the one that pulled this. And really, I just pulled it because, it was a consent item around spending money on new buses. And we're having this really difficult conversation about making a lot of cuts on things that aren't buses, new buses when we have buses. So I just wanted to, and it's to help explain to the public and to make sure we're all on the same page about what this is and why we're doing it and how it all works in terms of, state funding.
Absolutely. So on this item, our new director of transportation, who's been with us since July 1st, applied for a zero emissions bus grant. It's coordinated through the California Energy Commission and the California Air Resources Board, CARB. And so we have been approved for 10 buses, electric plug-in buses, and the charging infrastructure at no cost to the district. And so this helps the district move along in our first foray into electric buses and helps us move towards the target that the state has set. And I don't have that off the top of my head, so I apologize, but I think it's by 2035. We're supposed to have all of our fleet off of diesel. I think you can do a combination of CNG, compressed natural gas, and electric, but don't quote me on that. I'll have to check. So this is a huge shot in the arm. This is helpful to us. We have to coordinate, and it's a grant, and we have to report and do all of these things. But having a resolution come before the board is one of the check boxes for the grant process. They've already notified us that we are going to get this award. So it's a really great thing. It's a wonderful thing. And it's not something that we have to pay for out of our operating expenses or our budget, the same budget we were just discussing. So this is a good thing, positive thing. And after this somewhat perfunctory resolution, if you vote for it, we'll be able to schedule the next steps with I forget the name of the company, sorry, it's ZESB, who's doing I think they're implementing the grant. We can get on their calendar and find out how long it will take, how we do the installation, and all of those project details.
So it provides buses and the infrastructure for the charging.
That is correct.
And then can I ask, do we have so the buses that it's replacing, is that then things that we could sell and maybe could give us an extra 80 grand? Because I know we're nickel and dime and everything. Or is that then in restricted and that has to purchase more?
I will double check. More likely than not, if we have an asset that's already within the system, it's depreciated, all that accounting stuff, we'll be able to bring it to the board and have it declared as surplus. And then that gives the green light for us to turn around and see if we can find a buyer for it. A lot of the buses that we have and a lot of districts have will stop meeting California requirements.
But maybe not Alabama's.
But other states like our vehicles just fine. So there's a whole website network that is for public agencies to sell their materials, their assets. And so in this case, we would try to find a buyer whose the air restrictions aren't quite the same, and maybe they would like to have a bus that's 7 or 8 years old. I'm going to have to check with our director to see exactly what the inventory is and what his vehicle replacement plan is. I know he has one. I just don't have it off the top of my head.
And I heard something just yesterday on NPR about somebody that was selling diesel locomotives to some South American country, and California it's in California, and they were letting that go through, but then they were passing new legislation to not allow the polluting things to just move to another part of the world, because the whole point is to be removing them from service.
But we're in desperate.
Yeah.
As those lovely environmental students came. But anyway, okay. So we don't have public comment. Does anyone else?
The budget implication on that said zero budget implication. Do we always say if it's just a negative or neutral? We don't say if that's a positive.
I'm sorry.
So I mean, if we're getting all these buses for free, wouldn't that be a positive implication on the budget? If I'm recalling correctly, it said there was no budget implication.
Because we don't have to buy the buses or the infrastructure. I think that if we now go to the next step, snap your fingers, 10 new buses show up and we're plugging them in. Is there going to be a cost? Well, we have to charge them. So that's going to be the trade-off for the diesel fuel that we won't spend will now go towards PG&E, our vendor for electricity. So that's the ongoing functional cost, the operational cost. But the bus itself and the installation of the chargers is covered by the grant. That's what it meant when it was listed as no cost implications.
I see. Thank you.
Sure.
Right. Can I get a motion or to approve?
Yeah, I'll move to approve.
Second.
The motion was made by Board Member Ordway and seconded by Board Member Hurd. Roll call vote. Student Board Member Hodges.
Aye.
Board Member Hurd.
Aye.
Board Member Van Zee.
Aye.
Board Member Ordway.
Aye.
Board Member Clark.
Aye.
Board Member Broad.
Aye.
Motion passes 5-0. Great.
Laura,
thank
I
you.
realized when I made my motion about accepting the first interim that I did not include the other piece about the accepting the
resolution.
resolution. So could we
Should
do
we-
that as a friendly amendment to tack that on, or do we need a separate motion?
Does everyone agree with?
Yep,
Yes.
yep,
Then
yep.
I'm okay.
Because it was
Everyone else
separate
okay?
like that. I was thinking it was a separate item, but it was
Yes.
intended to be all together. So
Thank you. We'll make the notes.
Okay, great. All right, so now we're going to move into informational items. 12.1 Budget Advisory Committee Report, and that's Superintendent CJ Kamick.
Thank you very much. I want to welcome up Paul Gardner and Terry Caney. I owe them both a cup of coffee. I misestimated the time at which we'd get to this item, but hopefully they'll forgive me. Terry facilitated our Budget Advisory Committee, and Paul served as the chair. I do see two other members of our Budget Advisory Committee meeting in the audience, but they're normally in the audience, so we'll give them a double credit for that. So as the board knows, we engaged in a Budget Advisory Committee process, and I think it was a valuable process. And we had two trustees who were liaisons to that, Trustee Van Zee and Trustee Clark. And so we have a brief presentation for you tonight, which is a summary of the Budget Advisory Committee's report. I just want to put a disclaimer out there because there's a lot of conversation that has and will be happening around budget reductions. The budget reductions that we're talking about are not being presented tonight. And when they are presented at the next meeting, will be my recommendations as superintendent. They will be informed by a number of things and exercises that we've gone through, but I don't want to misconstrue the responsibility of those recommended reductions to the Budget Advisory Committee. So with that, I'll turn it to Terry and Paul for a presentation, and I will take over at some point in the presentation and finish it off.
Thank you, CJ. I appreciate it. As CJ mentioned, my name is Terry Caney. I'm joined by my friend and colleague and former member of this amazing board, Paul Gardner. We had the privilege of serving as the facilitators for the district's Budget Advisory Committee, which was made available and possible because of that rosy picture painted by Danny Hillman. But certainly necessitated. So, and as CJ mentioned, he will come in toward the end of our presentation, which will be pretty brief. Paul and I will talk a little bit about the process, and then we'll hand it over to Superintendent Kamick to talk more about the high level budget recommendations at this point. So, thanks, Logan. So the Budget Advisory Committee, just to give you a little background, was formed to tackle the significant challenge of addressing the district's financial needs while maintaining its commitment to providing an exceptional education for all students, the same kind of education that we've all become accustomed to here in the San Ramon Valley. Our goal was to create a transparent, collaborative, and data-driven process to recommend budget reductions that align with the district's strategic priorities and values. So let me state first of all that, as you know, SRVUSD is not alone in this endeavor. Most every school district in California is dealing with difficult budget decisions at this point, some less challenging, and many with much deeper challenges than what we are facing. And numerous factors, as Danny Hillman has mentioned, have played into this. I also want to point out that while I've seen many districts use various approaches to deal with their fiscal challenges, very few, if any, and I want to emphasize if any, have used an approach as inclusive and as transparent as San Ramon Valley Unified. And I know firsthand that this has always been how this district has dealt with issues just like this one. So kudos to this board and to the administration for pulling together a committee and a process that has been and continues to be productive, efficient, inclusive, and transparent. It's been a privilege to facilitate this group, which includes 20 dedicated members representing a diverse cross-section of stakeholders, in addition to Board Member Clark and Board Member Banzi, as well as Student Board Member Hodges. He was amazing, by the way. Our committee was comprised of teachers, administrators, staff, students, parents, and community members. Their insights, perspectives, and commitment to our shared mission have been instrumental in this process. All along, they have faced their role and responsibility with a spirit of collaboration and transparency, and they've been grounded in a commitment to fiscal responsibility and educational excellence. Our charge was to evaluate the current expenditures, identifying potential cost-saving opportunities, to explore new and potential revenue streams, to explore possible reductions across all areas of the district, and to engage with and survey our community. And we've done that. Next slide. The committee's work unfolded over the course of 4 months, adhering to a clear and structured timeline. Following tonight's presentation, we will have one final meeting of the committee in January to finalize our work before the final suggested budget reduction plan is presented to the board. And as CJ mentioned, this is a committee that's a superintendent's committee that will be presenting that plan for your consideration on January 14th. And Paul will go into our timeline with it just a tiny bit more depth in just a moment. But we knew going in that this would be a difficult process with many conversations to be had, right? We're a very people-intensive business with nearly 85% of the budget focused on people, on staff. In order to reach a balanced budget for the 25-26 school year and the 2 subsequent years, it would involve substantive budget reductions that would undoubtedly impact people, undoubtedly impact our operation and our work. So we felt that it was critically important to establish some principles or priorities that should guide this work going forward. And to the extent possible, we all agreed that this plan should be student-centered, limiting the negative impact on the students that we serve. It should not sacrifice or compromise student or school safety with a continued focus on equitable access to programs and supports. It should maintain staffing to the best of our ability, but also in ways that also seeks to optimize efficiency of the organization. It should seek out and try to leverage alternative funding sources. And finally, it should be able to be nimble enough to pivot and adjust if any of the conditions changed. As Danny mentioned, for example, the governor's January budget proposal or the May revision. These are our guiding principles throughout this process, and they'll continue to be our guidepost as we wrap up this work. And so now I'll hand it over to Paul to talk a little bit more about the process.
Thanks, Terry. Feels good to be back in this chamber. As Terry said, I'm going to talk a little bit about how we actually went about doing this. The committee members reviewed the budget and were told to focus on 4 areas: instruction, admin and clerical, special ed and transportation, and maintenance, grounds, and operations. In the 7 meetings held by the committee dived into the district's budgets and financing to assure all members had a full understanding of how the district is funded, followed by an extensive review of state and local funding through a presentation of school services. Pardon me. Based on what was covered in our first 2 meetings, the committee next broke into groups to explore district expenditures and reporting out to the entire committee what had been discussed. Based on those meetings, we then began discussing how and where expenditures could be reduced, always knowing that most of the cuts or many of those cuts would be subject to negotiation with the bargaining units. Lastly, building on the ideas the committee had formulated over the past weeks and informed by results of a survey of parents, the community at large, staff, and high school students, the committee provided input to the superintendent on what the content of his reduction plan could or should include. And I think it's time to turn it over to the superintendent.
Thank you, Paul, and thank you, Terry. In terms of looking at the survey data, I want to acknowledge up front, it's not a perfect system. It's not a perfect survey. Um, we talked and explored the idea of the survey and what's the best format for it. And I promise you, I read every response that came through. Some of them not so kind, but I read all of them. Some of them were thoughtful and creative and really seeking a solution focused mindset. The challenge lies in the fact that our budget is hundreds and hundreds of pages, and school funding is not the easiest thing to just pick up. And so what's better, an open-ended survey where people can give you their feedback around high priorities and lower priorities versus a drop-down list where people can rank their top 10 things. The challenge is creating a drop-down survey or a multiple choice survey. When you start talking about the budget, you're talking about 40, 50, 60, 70 things that people need to choose from. And if you don't build some understanding about what all those things are in advance, they're not going to do it. And if you have to rank 20 things, you're probably not going to do it. Additionally, if what you care about isn't on those 20 things, you're automatically turned off to the survey to begin with. So acknowledging that it's imperfect, appreciate that we did get some good community engagement. It's not as high as the engagement that we're seeing in terms of the cell phone survey. But we did get some good engagement from our employees, from our community, our parents, our caregivers, and students. I want to review just a little bit of the results. Given that it's not a perfect survey, on slide 8, you can see all of the responses lumped together. These are the themes and trends that came forward. There will be overlapping and in some cases conflicting pieces of information, because if a lot of people listed something as high priority 1, there may also be a lot of people who listed the same thing in 2 or in 3. And conversely, some people may have listed it as less impactful. But this is kind of a summary of the data that we see. You can see from all responses, class size and teacher staffing, very critical. Quality teachers and teacher retention, very critical. And support for students. Other high priorities, special education support, safe schools, support for staff and teachers, mental health, SEL, facility and resource maintenance, making sure we take care of our facilities, and curriculum and academic resources. In terms of things that are least impactful, district administration and district office staffing was an area of feedback. Non-essential programs and initiatives, resources towards student support, that those spoke to kind of staying in the core of what we need to provide. A lot of feedback came through related to technology and devices and how often we're purchasing them, how much they're in use or not use. Social equity and inclusion programs, there was feedback in the survey about the cost of those programs, which I think we can explore later because the current day cost is, I think, misconstrued from a financial standpoint. Technology spending and overuse, facilities, supplies, and technology, professional development, spending, and extracurricular programs and activities. I will say one piece of information that came across a lot, and I'll reference it in my budget reduction report at the next meeting, is I had a lot of responses that said, for an affluent community, we should not be providing free meals for all students, only students that require it. And I just want to call out for anybody who's listening or watching, that is not a cost absorbed by the district. That is absorbed by the state. And actually, for the first time in most of my career, districts are now operating their Fund 13, their child nutrition account, in the positive. So we buy the supplies, we buy the materials, we pay for the staff, and we get reimbursed from the state level for every meal we serve. So that is not a part of our budget challenges, just in case there's questions about that. I won't read through every single piece of the survey. It is in the attached report. It's also in the slide deck, but you can see the same set of responses broken out. Logan, if you could go to slide 10, please. Thank you very much. I will share out, we had kind of 2 more open-ended questions at the end of the survey: potential opportunities for greater efficiency, prioritizing the budget, making cost-saving measures, Administrative staffing was a common theme. Operational efficiency was a common theme. Again, technology and curriculum. That's why I mentioned the food and resource management, because that came up a lot in the open-ended section. Special education and support services. There was a question about how much are we spending and is that appropriate? I think the message is getting out that the federal government should be providing 40% of our funding for special ed, and they're at 9%. And the next question was other questions or things that people wanted to share with the district. Prioritizing resources that we have for district support, or for student support, not district support, sorry. Budget transparency and a concern about where we're spending money. As you saw on the first slide, equity, inclusivity, and special ed. Focus on teachers and academics, community engagement, and efficiency in administration and budget use. We further held 3 town halls. I think they were great points of conversation. I think those who took the time to attend 2 were held in the evening, 1 in the morning, trying to cover a wide range of individuals who could attend. In those, we talked about our unfunded and underfunded mandates. We talked already this evening about why we're in the fiscal condition that we are. One area we didn't highlight is that by my calculation, in case anybody wants to check my math, they can do it. I'm happy to be wrong. It's a rough estimate, but I went to eddata.org, took all the districts in the state, pulled off the county offices because they're funded differently, and pulled off the charter schools. If memory serves me, that leaves about 930 to 933 school districts. We fall in the bottom 4th percent for LCFF funding across the state. Over 80% of our general fund expenditures are related to personnel costs. Reductions made in a manner that protect things at the school sites. How do we secure more revenue beyond Measure Q? And again, as I talked about the special ed, right? We have talked, if you could go to slide, wait, it might be there. 14. Way to read my mind, Logan. These are challenges that we've talked about in this boardroom. They're in the report, so I'm not going to read them all to the board, highlighting LCFF, federal funding, and local funding. And then slide 15. I want to acknowledge and thank the members of the Budget Advisory Committee, because it's a difficult conversation. As Terry mentioned, Travis was a great member of our committee. We had other students as well, and we had a really rich diversity. We had parents, students, community members, Servia, CSCA, and SEIU, and management representatives. So everybody is there with a perspective to share. And when you start talking about budget reductions and budget reduction recommendations, there are things that become very personal and painful, and there are many things that are legally required to be negotiated. Because of that reason, we can't go into super great depth in those committee meetings about something that has to be negotiated and the effects or the outcomes of those decisions, because legally and from a good labor relations standpoint, those things should happen at the collective bargaining table. But the group did kind of coalesce or reach consensus around where we should be exploring our budget reductions, and that's captured on slide 15. So how do we create better organizational efficiency? How do we make reductions in contracts and services? How do we reduce expenditures in software? Buying less technology, not to say that we shouldn't buy any, but what's the appropriate amount to purchase? Staffing levels across schools, programs, district office, support services. How can we increase efficiency in transportation, remembering that we're legally mandated to transport students who qualify for transportation under the assessed needs of their IEP. Increase revenue by looking at other future ballot initiatives, looking at facility rental costs, looking at how do we advocate for higher state and federal funding, raising attendance rates, freeze and collapse vacant positions, and opportunities for improved partnerships. So some of these things could be considered more immediate. Some of them take a longer period of time. I think as we had a wonderful speaker share today, we need to advocate at Sacramento and in DC for the change that we want to see. And we need to keep doing that. We've been advocating for a long time to talk about enrollment-based funding. For a long time, nothing moved. And I don't know if it's going to move yet, but at least somebody passed legislation to study it. So now we're getting away from the nebulous concept of it. I want to thank the members of the committee for their committed engagement, for our trustees and our student trustee for being there, Terry and Paul. Unfortunately, I've had to make budget reductions in other districts right when I was starting. And I think this was a great group to work with. They asked great questions, and we've got a lot of work ahead of us. And I will say, my recommendations for budget reductions won't necessarily meet all the guiding principles and recommendations of this committee, not because I don't value their work, but because the lift that it will take to get $24 million across the finish line, I think is a little bit deeper and more significant than many of us could imagine. And it's not to say that our committee couldn't imagine it. There's a great group of very intelligent people, but the depth needed to reach $24 million in cuts can't necessarily protect everything. It's, as Danny said earlier, everything is going to be on the table, not by choice, but by necessity. I'd be happy to take any questions. The board does not need to take any action on this. It's an informational item only.
You know, we got into lots of questions in our action item around the interim report. So I don't know if anyone else has.
I just want to say thank you to Terry and Paul. You guys did a great job coordinating that, and thank you, CJ, for making that happen, because I think the engagement truly was phenomenal. And the people who kept showing up after every single meeting, Shelly and I were there, and it was like, I thought the thing was going to start dwindling once CJ rolled out how LCFF works. But actually, I think people were excited by that, because for the first time, it actually made some little bit of sense, which was great. And it's almost, I wish everybody in the community got a chance to understand that. Because I think it would answer a lot of questions that we're going to have from the community going up. But I think it gave us those resources to be able to go out and act as communication liaisons for those things. And I think another thing that goes back to something I think you, Laura, and Shelley were saying is being heavy-handed on cuts. One of the things we talked about in the budget advisory committee was track and modify. That was one of the things that kind of got brought up, of like tracking and modifying as we go into future years. And it kind of makes me think a little bit about those things of, actually there was a student that was attending that said, maybe if we'd been doing that, we wouldn't be cutting so much. And I think it's a fair assessment. But is looking at what are those kind of like first tranche, second tranche things that we have to consider, and what are priorities as it comes to that, of how it affects students and how it affects our entire district. So anyways, thank you guys so much. And there was some good dad jokes to buffer some of the sadness that was coming out. So thank you for that.
We're not getting it tonight.
Yeah, I was like, maybe it's too somber of a mood to do that. Are there any awards or trivia you're going to give out either too?
Oh, I think people just came because they wanted to get Terry's prize every
Yeah.
week. That's really the whole, that actually worked really well.
And your cookie.
Yes, and the
True, I did contribute to that. I want to thank you also. You both did a great job of making a really, really tough time and tough decisions, and looking at things we really didn't want to look at. You made it palatable and actually fun sometimes. We all had our little tables, and we all were able to really dive into things and really look at things closely, and like Jesse said, really understand, I think, a lot of things that maybe some of the people that were in there didn't. And CJ did a great job of communicating everything very clearly so that we could all understand the exact nature of what we were dealing with. So I think all in all, it was a great effort, and that it bore fruit. But as he said, there was no way that those of us who are not deeply involved at a district level could make those kinds of suggestions. But all in all, it was really a good experience.
Yeah, just to give a little anecdote of, we did one breakout where we just looked at technology, and really smart, great community leaders, parents in there. And we had robust discussion for, I don't know, 30, 40 minutes in there. I think we walked away after looking at a whole spreadsheet of like, I think we found $15,000 of savings. And it was really difficult because once you start looking at the line items, you're like, oh, but that could be good for students here. This could be good for teachers here. And I think the entire committee, came to that conclusion of this is really difficult to make these cuts. So.
And if I could just reiterate how impressive it was just for you to be open to this process. Most districts in this climate are given the Heisman to even forming a committee. So the fact that you're willing to do that and with all of the transparency that's involved, kudos to you. And I just also on behalf of Paul, just to say thank you to the staff because between Danny and Evan in particular, when we said the process was data driven, whenever the committee needed data, the staff was Johnny on the spot. I should say Evan on the spot because he was always there to provide us with ever information we needed. So thank you.
Great. Okay, and we don't have to take action, so I guess we'll done. Thank you so much for all of you working for the entire committee. Yeah, thank you. All right, so next we'll move to 12.2, first reading of revisions to board policies and administrative regulations. And that's Assistant Superintendent of Ed Services, Christine Huardo.
Yes, thank you. I might having some trouble with my microphone here, but yes, thank you. We are bringing forth a first read of several board policy and administrative regulations in the world of health and home and hospital. And I have two of my colleagues here, our Director of Student Services, Dave Kravitz, and our lead nurse, Kathy Rooney, to assist if you have any questions regarding our CSBA updates, just to update the new BPs and ARs in these areas.
Any questions?
For all of them or just that first one?
For all of
them. For all of them. Don't break the microphone. We don't have money to fix that. Too late. All right. So I had one regarding the administering medication, monitoring health conditions, policy 5141.21. In discussion of naloxone or Narcan, we have that on every single campus. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. We won't bite.
Yes, we have a minimum of 2 at every elementary and middle school and about 5 at every high school, and every AED in the district also has a set of Narcan in.
Okay, great. I have other questions. I just have to scroll. So if anybody else has any questions, feel free to.
If I may add on to that, is that funded by the state? I do remember there was a bill that was mandating.
Yeah, we get it through a program, yes.
Thank you. And most of these updates are routine in nature based on CSBA recommendations, things like that. Okay. Is there in these policies, it seems like it's really exclusive to emergency and first aid, where it would come to a medical decision being made on behalf of a parent if that parent has not opted out against that. Is there any other substantive changes, or is it just kind of adding to the legal nature of it?
It's adding to the legal nature of it.
Yeah.
There were very few changes.
Anybody else have any questions?
I don't have any, so keep going.
Yeah, I don't have any.
And I read them.
Yeah.
You know.
I think that was all I had. But it did seem a lot of the red strike through and the blue edition was expanded language, different definitions seem to update the legal jargon of it.
Right.
Great, and we're not taking action on this. It'll be in our consent agenda probably in January, right? Yeah. Okay. All right, great. Thank you so much. Yeah, yeah.
Thank you, Kathy.
Thanks for staying. Good.
Tell your friends.
All right, so that is, now we'll move on to administrative matters, and we have the board member reports. So Rachel, you want to go first?
I have a few things. Right before the Thanksgiving break, I got to participate in the Thanksgiving Baskets project that is led by Los Cerros Middle School. And I just want to lift up the amazing work that that school does. My Rotary did in delivering these baskets to almost 60 of our district families that were in need. But in addition to the bags for the district, they had bags for Monument Crisis Center and multiple other charities. So, I mean, it's like their multi-purpose room was full of the big Costco-sized grocery bags filled with groceries, and then turkeys and pies got added to it. And so also hats off to our social worker, Dia Mundell, for the work she does to orchestrate who we get them to and all of that. And it's just such a great feel good thing, and so nice to be actually helping families within our own district. Last week, as CJ already discussed, we were all at CSBA. I think it was a wonderful week of learning. I was there the whole week because I had CSBA stuff before that, but also just a really fabulous time to spend just downtime with all of you. And I know we've all shared it via text, but it was really nice. So thank you. I thank you, CJ, for the props about our presentation. It's like, your life's work up there, and it felt so good that it was well attended. And I was so proud of our team for what and how they presented, and the response, as Laura said, was really, really nice. It was interesting because the next day I was convener in my role on the conference committee for a session on was titled Advancing Educational Equity and Achievement for All Students, starting with baseline systems. And it was a consultant that had worked with a superintendent who was on the committee with us. And it was all very much addressing the steadfast achievement gap that was really on Mr. Arata's charts, right? And I think it's important to note that in her presentation, she put those graphs of ELA and math up there, no legend on them. And she asked, what's the top line? What's the bottom line? And we all knew what color was what. She said, how'd you know that? It's the legend. There's no legend. Well, it's because everybody knows what those things are. It's not good, but it's not a unique to San Ramon Valley kind of thing. And I just felt like, given that public comment and how recent that presentation was, it was really important to bring that up. That's the point of the LCAP, to address that. It's every single school district in this state and this country is addressing those systemic inequities. And there's academic ways to get at it. It's system ways of what do you expect from students? How do you plan your courses, and what tracks do they get stuck in? And it's also the work that we're doing in equity. And so I just felt like it was kind of tying in a bow some of the things we've heard tonight. One more thing, I had the pleasure yesterday of being at Monte Vista in the morning. We did a press release about a student at Monte Vista named Christian, who is raising puppies that then go on to be trained for sight dogs. And the story was because he's a traffics rider. And so it was the first time of having a puppy on the bus. And first student was like, wait, how do we do this? And we were able to say, wait, we have policy there. And so it was a great story. And this reporter, who's a radio reporter, I don't remember which one, was totally into this and totally into how mellow the dog was. And he noticed how, wow, the kids are all mellow around the dog. And we went in a classroom. And then while we were chatting him up, we also got to talk about other things related to education. And bless Kevin Ahern, he brought up the phone policy work we're doing. He brought up the ethnic studies, and it even segued into personal finance. So I think with this reporter, we have an education friendly reporter, when they talk about all this news not covering education, it was a nice fit. It was really nice to be part of that. And I got to be at the Student Senate yesterday. And I just want to say I was really impressed with the president's desire to hear feedback from the fellow senators about what's working, what's not, how can I support you better? And it was just really nice to see that example of shared leadership happening right in our student leaders ranks.
It's awesome. So Similarly, went to California School Board Association meeting, and I went all in on AI throughout the whole conference. I think it was at 5, 6 different breakout sessions if you include the keynotes on AI. And that's because I really feel that we're at this interesting time, I think, in our country, in our world, where AI is going to present significant challenges. I think it's going to present a lot of solutions. I think there was a stat that I heard thrown out quite a few times. I'm not even sure where they're getting this from or if they're just trying to look into a crystal ball with it, but they kept saying in 2030, 85% of the jobs that will exist currently do not exist. And when we look at just the track record throughout even just the last 150 years, how slowly things change, that gives you an idea of how dramatic disruptive technology AI is, in a good way and in a bad way, where we're kind of having to learn. But some of the takeaways too of just um, as we're learning about this, to create policy and protections and guidance as board members for AI in our schools, the understanding that students already learned, like they're already using this. It's a matter of us creating policies to guide it so it can be productive, as well as helping the teachers understand it to help it, to be helpful as an aid in class. And that's the other thing too. It's not there to do your thinking for you. And we should be instructing our students on how to be using it as a cognitive augmenter or assistant to get them to produce and learn at a greater capacity and a greater skill level, as well as what's going to be in the future. Um, and so I'm just really interested and excited about this because I use it personally and professionally. And all the additional tools. One thing that was kind of my takeaway is I thought I was a proficient user of AI. And then I went to some of these, I'm like, I'm just scratching the surface. And so it's really exciting because I think the AI technology that we're using this year, next year is going to look like modem dial up AOL. And so, as we look at this and kind of moving in forward to this, I think it's also important to understand the safety and security and cautions and privacy issues and all these things. So, anyways, I was really excited and did go all in on those sessions at CSBA. And then the other thing that I really enjoyed was on Sunday night, we went to the Celebration of Christmas concert at the Latter-day Saints Church over here. We had all 4 of our district's choirs sing in that performance, and they are phenomenal. And there was and I had the chance to bring my entire family, so we took up almost an entire pew there. And my 5-year-old, he hung in as best as he could, but we had a great time. There was tons of cookies and hot cocoa and sugar and just a great Christmas vibe. And there was a ton of people there. And so it was just so cool to see all our district choirs be able to go. And every single one of us was there. It was my first year being able to attend. So I was really just proud of our schools and our students and our choir directors. I'm just the phenomenal music and talent that they're able to hone and produce. So
I think this last week is probably the most I've seen you all with all the different. So yeah, of course. Yeah. So it's the SBA. I was also there a little earlier as a delegate to attend a delegate assembly. So thank you for nominating me because yeah, the exercises and we voted and just I think it's important, right, for us to still work with the CSBA and make sure that our voice, our district, our region, right, suburban, right, school district voices are heard too from CSBA because the funding and certain things are very different in terms of the district that you're in. So yeah, AI. I tried to attend a couple of AI ones. They were full, so I think I couldn't get in. So I think they were very popular with all the school districts. Wanted to say that, yeah, I think superintendent had mentioned it, but really enjoyed, right, that celebrating our students, 4 students at the risk taker, remaker. It's a long long title, but it's actually by Innovation Tri-Valley. And yeah, and we were there celebrating them. And actually, I think one of those students, she was actually a performer also at the at our the Christmas concert we all attended. So no, it was really, really great and had a really great time. Yeah, networking and learning. I want to also give kudos to our Science of Reading group for the panel. But and that's great. But I also had people come up to me after we spoke about student voice, because I was sharing about how we do it, and they wanted to know how we establish like our student senate and how the process of selecting student board member and things like that. So I think, no, I think we're doing some really.
That should be next year's submittal.
Yeah, that's it for me.
So I attended our grade reform committee, and there's some great work being done there, and I think it's going to be coming to fruition soon. So it'll be interesting to see how that goes. And then before I left for CSBA, I picked 120 cookies for reflections. Because they were short on cookies, and I said I would fill the bill, which I enjoyed doing. I didn't enjoy the fact that I was going to miss reflections, but apparently it was really a great event. I enjoy that every year because of the arts. CSBA was amazing. Our team presenting was amazing, led by Rachel and Annabelle, and they did a great job, and the room was captivated, I think. We were all there to support them. The Christmas concert, I've gone every year, and every year it's fabulous to see the amazing talent and dedication that our students have in the arts. And that is always an enjoyable event. And it was especially enjoyable because we were all there. And I finally got to meet all of Jesse's kids and his wife. And I'll be baking them some special Christmas cookies because they're cookie fans. And I think that's it for me. I'm looking forward to being sworn in on the 19th and taking the seat of president.
I'm looking forward to finishing my year as president. It's been a roller coaster, but it's been enjoyable. I've learned a lot. Risen to the occasion, as they say. So I went to the Apapa Happy Hour that that Susanna's group put together. And there were a lot of electeds, newly electeds and re-electeds there, and that was lovely. We had our parcel tax oversight committee kickoff. And I'm grateful for the new members, and it was wonderful. Danny gave a great presentation on budget, and it's always nice to see those aha moments in our community, because our budgets are so complex, and but once you kind of have an understanding, you can peel back the layers a little bit easily and understand things and the complexity of it, which is great. I was able to stop by I think the last budget town hall meeting. I stopped by for about half of it, and that was another opportunity to see the light bulbs go off in the community that was here, which was great. Celebration of Christmas, as you've all mentioned, that's always a highlight. Graduation, celebration of Christmas. There's a few like kind of touchstones in each year that's just always kind of fun and brings light and joy into just everything that we do. So today, right before the board meeting, I stopped by the opening of the Family Justice Center that's over in the same complex as County Supervisor Candace Anderson's office. It's something that she had really advocated for with county funds. There have been, I think there's maybe two other family justice centers in North County, and it's really great to to have one down here. You know, so often people make assumptions that South County, that, you know, we're fine, we got it. But to Rachel's point, you know, there are families in need, and it's not necessarily a socioeconomic thing, you know, it's just families that are in crisis for whatever reason. I met one of the county navigators there, so they'll have people on staff that can help a family, caregivers to be able to navigate the county services, and that's really valuable. And I think it's important for our families and our school district to know that that resource is there, because it's a great research source for us to have down here in South County. And then at CSBA, we had there were so many amazing workshops. We went to breakfast with Apizma, and Alex Lee and Al Martasucci, I always say his name wrong, were there. They did a fireside chat, and then I raised my hand and they didn't call on me, but I zipped up and I asked I asked Al Martasucci about funding for PERS and STIRS, and how, you know, we saw with the budget, the interim budget report, that, you know, 19.1% for PERS, and it's moving up from 27.6 to 28% of our staff salary. And on top of that, we send back to the state, and it's just, I understand that those pensions have to be funded, and that's incredibly important. The thing that frustrates me is that we're being sent money for a general fund to help us support students in seats today, and then we're sending 40 million back, I'm guessing at that number, back to the state. And that's affecting the kids in the seats today. And so when our state has some additional revenue, it would be really great for them to help to pay down, so that we're looking at more of a 15% kind of consistent. With PERS, it's consistent. With STIRS, it's not so consistent. It's close, but you know, buying that down a little bit, so that yes, we are paying our fair share and supporting the pension for our staff. That's incredibly important. But you know, it's the cost of fully funding it is being put on the kids that are sitting in our classroom today, and to me that just doesn't equate. So he you know, he kind of looked at me with a little bit I've heard this before, and talked about how they had kind of brought down the percentage during COVID a little bit, which was helpful, but there needs to be more. There needs to be more. So anyways, that's something on my bucket list as I look to advocate for ways for us to kind of get a little bit of relief. You know, it's just all about money, and there's never enough money. And how can we, you know, to Mr. Allen's point, how can we kind of push and pull a little bit? So that's my list, and that's the end of the meeting. So meeting adjourned.